So I think it's everyone's best interest that we get started here. This is the Special Board of Education meeting. We're in open session. And the topic of the day's discussion is the Educational Resource Officer, commonly referred to as the ERO. And today we're here to talk specifically about the contract and certain items in the contract, but to have a general contract discussion as we move forward to possibly approving the contract down the road. And so that's the subject of today, and I'd like to get us started by calling on our superintendent for some opening comments.
Thank you, James. While I'm doing that, I'm going to ask Dylan Pauley to join us, our legal counsel, and Luis Udice, if you guys won't mind coming up to the table. Over a couple of years ago, this is a reminder not just to the board, but the public, in alignment with the development and approval of our more restorative approach to behavior and the behavior education plan, we began to take a look at our education resource officers. This was actually a request made, I think, initially by the ad hoc committee of the board that worked on the behavior plan. And the purpose was to ensure full alignment of our work with EROs to our mission and values as an organization. We believe that our approach to behavior, and by extension the utilization of our EROs, must be in full alignment with our district's comprehensive approach to disrupting racial inequities, raising student achievement, and making sure that every child in our district graduates ready for college, career, and community. It's all part of the same strategy. Over the past couple of years, I think actually starting in the fall of 2014, we've had an annual meeting with the board on this topic. And as a result of those significant discussions, we've made sure our practices are aligned with guidance on best practice, such as the guidance provided by the ACLU that came up a couple of years ago. And that was a very good process for us. That includes increasing and improving the training for our administrators on how and when to involve EROs. It also included some work that we did on better data use, right? Are we actually tracking arrests and citations? Are we looking at that data on at least an annual basis in a public session, which we now do? So we've made a lot of progress. We're bringing you the renewal of this contract tonight as an administrative staff because we believe that our EROs can and do have a positive influence on student outcomes, and that their work can and should be in support of our commitment to restorative justice. So I just want to make sure you know that that's why we're here. Tonight we're having this additional discussion for two main reasons. One is the board requested some time to discuss the contract before approving it. We are very sensitive to the national debate that's happening around the relationship between police and community, and in particular youth and youth of color. We understand that, we respect it deeply, and want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So Dylan is actually going to do a quick review of the ERO contract changes, where we're at with negotiations with the city. And then we'll open up for discussion. I think what we need from the board tonight, and James, I'll look to you to help us with this, is to get some clear direction on, if we're going back into negotiations with the city, what it is that the board wants us to work on in the next couple of weeks. So I'll leave it at that and pass it off to Dylan so she can do a quick overview of the contract.
So we provided you with copies of the contract. There are not a huge number of significant changes, but I will go over and just kind of highlight the ones. Just remind you that at this point we are recommending a 3-year contract, which defines both the cost of the services and the services to be performed for 4 EROs, one at each of the 4 comprehensive high schools, with 4-year assignments with the options for a 1-year extension. We are hoping that the changes that have been incorporated reflect the feedback that we got beginning at the March discussion. and in many ways are intended to provide just additional clarity to where we thought the language already was. In response to some concerns about whether EROs have appropriate student-specific information when engaging in student conduct, we clarified the role of school official. That language has been in the contract. I know there was some confusion based kind of on the consent memo that was previously provided, so I tried to make it clear that the information identifying an ERO as a school official for the purposes of receiving student information has been in the contract. But we wanted to clarify that when appropriate for performing their duties, information from a student's behavior intervention plan or safety plan may be appropriate for them to be privy to. I also want to share that as a school official, they're then bound by not redistributing that information pursuant to the school officials. So it doesn't automatically become information that is then within the law enforcement sphere at that point. So we did add that clarifying language. We wanted to clarify language around debriefing of incidents and having the administrative team and the ERO when there is a need for ERO law enforcement type intervention, which is one component of the role of the ERO in the school, that there are clear expectations that all the parties debrief to determine how the intervention unfolded and what, if anything, could be done differently in the future. We had heard a lot of feedback about the need for more specific training regarding work in a school environment versus that is so embarrassing, versus a non-school environment. And so what we wanted to ensure was that we can't think of that laundry list in this contract. So what we wanted to do is provide the flexibility for MMSD to determine training that would be needed. We listed some examples. Some of those examples were de-escalation techniques or addressing the needs of students with mental health concerns or students with cognitive disabilities, but it wasn't intended to be an exhaustive laundry list, but rather an example list when training needs arise, that we have the flexibility to require that training. In section 2E2, there is the emphasis on the use of restorative practices, youth and community courts in lieu of citations and arrests. And then finally, we reemphasize the role of MMSD having authority to drive the training. There were some minor financial changes. I am batting zero tonight. There are some minor financial changes. The cost of the contract is still primarily borne by the district, but we did have some concessions from the city on the paying for training time for the EROs. It used to be that 4 days in advance, 3 were the district's responsibility, and 1 was the city's, and the city has agreed to pay for those training days. So that is an overview of the changes that are reflected in the proposed contract that you'll be considering tonight.
Okay. Yeah, so we've heard from Dylan, and I think really we have a short amount of time here this evening, so we just really need to jump right into it and voice our concerns or support for the current contract so we can give administration some clear direction as to how we move forward. And so at this point, I think we'll entertain. Do we have Anna? Anna, are you on the phone, and are you able to hear? Is Anna on the phone?
She was.
Okay, well, maybe she still is. Okay, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
live streaming it, so
All
there's
right.
like a delay.
Okay, so we'll open it up for comments at this point, so floor is open. Comments about the contract. Mr. Mertz.
To start with a question, which is, what's the status of the contract with the city? I understand that there was an authorization that was pulled from an agenda in July, and so no one from the city's actually been authorized to negotiate this contract. Is that correct?
I don't know that to be true. So June Wilson spoke to Michael May just to figure out what the timing was of the contract, and my understanding is it's going back on the city's agenda at the beginning of September. So we have been negotiating with the city attorney's office.
The item that was pulled was authorizing negotiations, and it was pulled from the Board of Estimates off the agenda. And so, in fact, their side has not been authorized for what that's worth.
We have in fact been negotiating, but I have not done any homework on to whether they've been negotiating with authority that they do or don't have, but we have been directly working with the city attorney's office.
I guess I'll go with comments then. Or,
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's.
My biggest concern going into this is criminalization of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talked about this in March, I wasn't aware that there were any policies in any other, or practices in any other districts or locales where limitations were put on the ability of school officers to arrest and cite. More recently, I've become aware of those. And once I became aware of those, I think that it's very important for us to move beyond the language we have, which reflects the belief that officers should not be criminalizing matters that are handled disciplinary, to actual language in the contract that says they cannot do that. And there's a difference there. And so I sent a couple links to a couple places that have done things, and I'm sure there's more out there, but those are just the ones that I'd come across briefly. And so it's kind of a short timeline to incorporate these kind of things, but nonviolent ordinance violations, things along those lines. I think we could probably find a classification where we could say that officers are not empowered to issue citations or arrest for these matters, and I think I very, very much think we should. So that's number one. Number two is about public reporting. The superintendent mentioned that in March we had a discussion that in fact we didn't. The report was not attached to the agenda. The report was sent in private to the Board of Education. And the reports have never been posted publicly. And I think that it is incumbent for us to post that data publicly. I think that the transparency needs to be there. As something that's sent privately to the Board of Education, it would be subject to Freedom of Information request, but no one's going to know it exists unless unless it's public. So I think that posting those publicly as a matter of practice, and again, to include that in the contract. There is reporting requirements in the contract, and to add the words publicly to the Board of Education instead of to the superintendent, which is the current language. I think that's important. Number three is I think that we should do this for 1 year. I think that there's clearly great interest in the community. There is an evaluation of police practices in Madison going on that's been authorized by about to begin, that's been authorized by the city. I know a number of alders have asked informally that practices of police in the schools be included in that evaluation. And in order for us to incorporate any recommendations from that evaluation, it would be not impossible to do it with a 3-year contract, but the city would have to agree to those, or else we go without them incorporated. And so I think that doing a 1-year contract makes sense to me. And additionally, I'd say the 1-year contract is that, we've also just recently learned that our surrounding districts appear to split costs with their municipalities, instead of us picking up all the costs. And I think that that's something we could continue to pursue instead of being locked into a 3-year contract where the costs are almost all borne by the school district. And then not a change in the contract per se, but I do think that if we do a 1-year contract, we should take the advantage of the year and explore bringing this relationship under our partnership policy. And in doing so, increase monitoring and evaluation, and vetting in general. So those are the things that I kind of come to the table with. Having read the YWCA letter, the big thing that jumps out at me from that doesn't overlap with the issues I've already raised, is a procedure or policy for student complaints about officers, which doesn't appear to exist. And since they are not employees of the district, though we are paying their salaries, they would have to go through whatever complaints procedure exists for the police department. And I think perhaps that given this special situation, that we should have a procedure and policy in place for students to complain about officers. So, those are my main.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Merks. Do you want to respond for a couple of minutes on anything prior to we move to the next board member? Is there anything you'd like to add or say at this point?
Okay.
Right, I mean, I think this is our opportunity.
Yes.
I think on the criminalization of behavior, I think this is a very good point. And Dylan and I talked about it a little earlier today about taking some time to look at how we can strengthen the contract language in that area. Broward County is a district that we have looked very closely at, talked with consistently. I used to work with the superintendent there. We both worked in CPS together. And they are really setting the bar for other districts when it comes to restorative practice and partnership with across entities when it comes to restorative justice. So yeah, would love to take that into consideration and think about what we can do to strengthen it. Let's jump to the one-year contract for a minute. Is that all right if that we're
Sure,
just jumping
sure.
around?
Just make sure.
Do you want to
just
add
be
anything
quick so
on?
that we can get all the
Yeah.
board members.
So that was something we initially pursued, and it was not something that the city was open to in those initial discussions for a couple of reasons. There's kind of the financial security and stability of having a contract in place. There is the impact that it has on the officer in the role, and having officers volunteer for the role with stability of a contract versus a 1 year. And so it quickly fell off the table. And so that's where we were. And we saw the rationale for the cities and didn't pursue it. So I just want, that's kind of the historical. And then with the public reporting, whether how we treat the data it warrants negotiation with the city, or we just have our own expectations of performance, would just be the only comment I would have. I don't know that we need to negotiate with the city, nor should we really, what we're going to do and how transparent we're going to be with our reports and our data and how we're going to handle it internally. I think that's just our way of working with each other and communicating to the public.
Can I just clarify here that some of that data is their data, isn't it? Is it not?
Well, so there are a couple ways we're coming about the data. So the data that was used to populate this report was public records requests we made through law enforcement or through the police department, and then we manipulated and analyzed that data on our own and created our report.
Okay.
We're also using Oasis ourselves to have our own internal tracking system too that goes beyond ERO badge numbers.
James, I just want to clarify real quick
Okay,
because
quick clarification.
yeah.
I want to make sure everyone else can get their comments.
I'm just trying to pin down. The contract currently requires an annual report to the superintendent. And what is contained in that report?
It says to be mutually agreed by the parties.
And what has been contained in that report in the past?
It's a synthesis, really, of those weekly reports that kind of upfeed, and then an analysis of the overall safety analysis of the building.
Arrest and citation data, demographics. We presented that information to the board,
And-
and that came out.
Okay,
to be-
we'll,
Okay.
I think
Okay,
your
I'm just trying to
But your-
figure out
your
what's what.
point-
Your
Yeah.
point, we'll come back to this point, but we got to make sure we have a short time window here. So Michael, please.
Well, first I'd like to apologize because I didn't get to make my own conference with the news, so that way I can also sway on behalf of sway the public, the other side of the importance of our EROs. Our EROs, yes, there's small portions that do happen, but that's after there's a criminal offense that happens in our school. And talking about the criminal behavior without acknowledging, we're creating a bubble for our students, our high school students who are getting into adulthood. And there's a false illusion that they can do certain things in our schools without repercussions, and that's not the real world. So that's a little aspect of what our EROs do. The city has been begging for a different kind of policing, a policing that is proactive, that builds relationships. If you guys have not met the EROs, we are fortunate that our EROs are officers of color, officers who build relationships. Mostly what's on the news, and they put a picture of him on the newspaper, which was great. That's going on. But even beyond that, I've heard stories of Rossetti, and I know Officer Rossetti. I worked with him on the south side and had very positive connections with him. There's students that are adults now that were guided in a positive way, students of color that still ask for a white officer who develop a sense of trust, a sense of belonging, encourage them to come to school and get out of a negative path and follow a positive pathway. That's what our EROs are doing in our schools, and saying that just putting it on that they're just there to arrest our kids. That's a ridiculous statement or an overgeneralization of issues that are happening in our nation. But Madison has been proactive and is proactive. But here is where the city fails. They're not stepping up to a different kind of policing. They're not putting their money where their mouth is. And EROs, Amigos en Azul, officers that are working with the Vera Court neighborhood, they have a farther reach that we have in the school district. Another example was one of our officers that works with the Vera Court neighborhood. She's able to reach out to other officers and provide meals for kids who are struggling in our schools. Within the schools, we can't reach out, or we don't reach out. We don't build up that familiarity. So going to a 1-year contract, it doesn't allow our EROs to develop that relationship. Relationships take time. We cannot ask for our children to trust just whatever body we put in that role. So I think having this 3 to 4 year contract is important. And the city should step up to it. But in the meantime, I think we are doing great things for our students. Mostly it's a great mentor for my daughter who's at La Follette. And I emailed the board a testimony from a parent whose daughter was having issues with her boyfriend, where the boyfriend was raising threatening behavior towards the daughter. Mostly was able to guide her, protect her, encourage her to come to school and not have that fear. Within the same family, her younger brother was having difficulties in school. Mostly was a positive mentor that was able to encourage him to continue going to school. Now he has graduated and he has joined the military. Sulma is a great role model at East High School. She's the officer that works with the Vera Court neighborhood. And unfortunately, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting the 2 EROs at West and Memorial. But nobody is speaking on behalf of the EROs and the work that they cannot mention because they're bound by the legal legal confidentiality, and oftentimes parents don't get to see that. We had students that we had to expel because they were being extorted by their own parents to bring in drugs into our schools. That's a big issue. And if we keep bashing our EROs or our officers, we're opening ourselves to criminal behavior. As a gang member, I could step into the schools. Why? Because Dean's not gonna get in trouble selling drugs into schools as a student because we have this bubble. But as soon as Dean steps outside of the schools, the law applies, whether you're a minor or an adult. But we cannot create this false bubble. That's where we're setting up our students of color, and all of our students that fall for negative influences. But in our schools, we have positive influences that stand strong and do have a long arm, long reach of the law. So that's some of what I want to say on behalf of our EROs and the importance of the EROs in school. And people need to get out there and get to work with the EROs. As a firefighter, or as a paramedic, I responded to an emergency where I was able to make contact with one of our EROs, and they were able to help me out in finding the student in crisis. And they themselves were a great connection, where the student was not familiar with me, but they had the familiarity with the ERO, and we had a positive connection. So it made my job and my response to this emergency a lot easier and more comfortable for our students. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Loomis.
Yeah, thanks. I got three points. One is a comment is when we started developing the BEP, and I'm not sure we spent enough time on linking the conversation with the role of ERO, and I think we need to go back and take a better look at that and link it. It's integral. In March, when we had a thorough meeting, a more thorough meeting, the EROs were here, and they talked about how important it was for them each to develop the relationships with students, and that was clearly a big bonus and positive, and to be able to have the uniform and have a positive impact in a way that you would like it to be works well, and we've got some good folks in there. So I think we need, as a board, need to go back and specify, make it more clear as to how staff, when is a proper time to make a call for police to come, and make sure that that's as defined as we can get it. And then the other side as well. What is behavior that can be dealt with through the BEP, and what crosses the line? There are two specific things in the contract that struck me that I would like to know more about. One was on page A1, Roman numeral 2, number 3, where in the event of a disaster, a terrorist attack, and other emergency, Chief of Police has the right to remove the ERO. And I just thought, well, wait, if something like that's happening, shouldn't we protect the school? Have them stay right there. There's something, well, hell's breaking loose somewhere. Let's make sure the kids are all right. So I have that. It's kind of vague as to what that means. I think Kelly emailed back, says, well, we're anticipating there. It says kids would already be sent home from school and there wouldn't be anybody there. Well, all right. Well, that makes sense. But what if they are? And then the other question that it adds up is that if something happens in a school that's not a high school, can we pull them from there to go over to that school? I don't know if that's something that we can use this role. And then the other issue I had, which is I'd really like to know more as to how this is done, is room number 3, letter B, the education resource to students on issues related but not limited to alcohol and other drugs, understanding laws, ordinance, and juvenile. And number 3, the role of law enforcement in educational setting as well as the role of enforcement in the community. How do they do that? Now, my friend Wayne was over there. He teaches this in school. I'd go to his class. He could teach it, but the ERO, how do they do that? And I also worked in a alcohol and drug treatment program, and the people that taught this stuff in there had degrees in this stuff. And how do they do that? I think that they can. I don't want to go there and counsel somebody. Hey, you should stay away from this, But those are important things, and I just don't know how they do that. I'd like to know how this is done, and Although, so those are my 2 points, and the most important part that I saw was that, and I think we should emphasize this, is the relationship building and their involvement in the restorative justice programs. Those things are a key part of the BEP, and their involvement in that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
And they should spend a lot of time in there working in that. And these other things I just have questions about. And since we pay it, since everything is on our dime, something bad going on in the community, I want them to stay there, make sure the kids are protected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and I'll let it go.
Okay.
Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, I have a few quick points. One is, when we talked about this earlier, I was not very happy about the fact that we pay the entire cost of this and the city doesn't pay any of it, and I had hoped that we would be able to maybe adjust that, and I guess we can't, and I understand that given the city's financial constraints, they're not about to volunteer to take on more costs than they have to. I think that we just set an unfortunate precedent when we started on this, and it would be difficult to change it now. With respect to the term of the contract, I understand, I think it would be helpful to be able to get out of it after a year for a number of reasons. If, in part, just if we do need to make changes, having the right to terminate gives us some leverage to be able to make those changes. So what I would suggest specifically is on page 4, section 19C, which is the school district's right to terminate, I would simply eliminate the language solely on the basis of MMSD budgeting constraints. I don't understand why we should be limited to that. I think as long as we give them 60 days notice prior to the beginning of any year, we should be able to terminate. I agree with that. And then the final point is that TJ mentioned a complaint procedure, and I think that makes sense. But I think that's something that we can institute it internally, because I think it makes sense for a student to complain to a principal or an assistant principal, because if that complaint has merit, then having the principal or a school official talk to the police department about it, I think would be a little more effective than have a student file whatever they would file with the police department, which I don't know how far that would go. So,
Thank you, Mr. Hughes.
Anna. See if Anna has.
Anna, do you
Okay.
have anything you'd like to add at this point?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Thanks for including me. I am here listening. There's a little bit of a delay, though. I like Ed's idea. I also feel that right now, particularly with the review and also our very tight budget moving forward in the next few years, that I would like to see some flexibility and not be locked into a 3-year contract, particularly if there are things that come up that we may want to look at changing. I know there's some great work that's being done by the Advancement Project, and we're actually currently working with them already with the Guiding Coalition. And so, this is an organization that we're already partnered with, and they might be able to provide us some guidance that we would want to have folded in to the contract as well. And so removing that about the budgetary constraints would probably give us the flexibility that we need. I also agree with, I believe, Dean and TJ, the conversation around criminalizing student behavior. Now, I guess in my opinion, I'm not sure if this is something to deal with, something to go into the contract, or if this is something that we actually need to put into our own policy. I think it would be most appropriate within the behavior education plan. I think I brought this up when we were discussing revisions several months ago around when it is appropriate for school staff to be including EROs or outside officers into behaviors that are taking place at school, and really being more explicit around whether we're going to say for a tier 1 behavior, you can't call in the ERO or an outside officer, and really put the responsibility on the school district and our staff. Because I think when we leave it not as clear, then we open ourselves up to putting not only students and staff into unsafe situations, we are also putting our officers into unsafe situations that might not be appropriate for them to be involved in at that point in time. So whether that needs to go into the contract or it's something we need to go through when we revise the BEPs to look at making it more explicit for our district, I would like to see something like that move forward. I also agree with TJ around the partnership issue. It would be nice if this could go through that process. We're obviously paying a considerable amount of money. That's well worth the money. But I do think that would make the process more transparent and also give the opportunity for more public input into this discussion. And, really the last thing, just to say, I really think I appreciate these conversations and coming back to this discussion. I think just in our district, we're always in a continuous cycle of improvement. And so by going back and revising and looking at this contract, it is in no way meant to bash any officers. It's simply just saying, look at what we have now, look at what we've learned, and how can we do things better for everybody. So that would just be my closing comment.
And thank you, Anna. I'll make a few comments at this point. When we started this process, I don't know, a couple of years ago, the main points that we began the conversation around was around school discipline. That is that, we want to make sure that when EROs were called, that there was really was not a matter that should be handled by our staff. And that still rises to the top of the concerns here, that when we have situations in our schools, if there are just a simple disciplinary situation, we want our staff to handle that. And we want to make sure that that's in the contract. And in saying that, I think overriding every comment is the question of whether or not we need to be more explicit in what I heard a few board members talk about here, or because some of the things is a little vague, and we need to be a little more explicit about what are some of the disciplinary matters that we want to make sure that our staff is handling. I'm wondering if that should be really spelled out and clear in the contract. The other major issue was what's going on around mental health. We want to make sure that there's training, and we spoke a little bit about ERO training and our own staff training, which we're have underway, and our staff are getting, making sure that we treat those situations properly, because those situations in most cases are not a situation where we should have an ERO involvement, and if an ERO is involved, then they should be properly trained to deal with the mental health issue. One of the questions I have, and it's been raised here, is should we include language? We mentioned the city's review, and I think it's important that whatever those findings are, that somehow we do include or have the flexibility in the contract to incorporate some of that language. If there's some findings there that we deem important, how do we do that? Maybe it's done under the what Ed mentioned, or the one-year contract, or I don't know if it's really right to terminate, but we need to be able to. We need to have some language that we can be able to incorporate the findings of the review whenever those findings come about. One of the things that's always was important to me was this whole notion of partnerships. When you read the contract really talks about service. Mm-hmm. It's really a service contract, and that really bothers me probably more than anything, because it seems as though we should be talking about a partnership. And so how we get to the point to understand that, this is a partnership. It's not so much because it's benefiting the community, it's benefiting the police, it's benefiting everyone, this relationship. And so to me, it seems like more of a partnership instead of this police department delivering a service to the schools. And so that's, to me, is very important. I like TJ's suggestion around the complaint, and I like Ed's amendment about internal implementation, student complaints. I think those are very important. Relationship building. Mike talked about the relationship between police and our staff and our students, And maybe one of the areas of real support for EROs in our schools is the fact that if we have EROs in our schools, they're there on a regular basis. They have the opportunity to build relationship with the students. The question I have for everyone is, do you want a situation where a police officer is called and that police officer, we have no idea who that police officer is? I live my life by the 5% rule. Regardless of what occupation you're in, there's going to be 5% of the people that's not going to do a good job. And so when you have police coming into your schools being called, are you better off not knowing who they are, or are you better off knowing who they are? They've been in your schools, working with the kids, and haven't built relationships. Where are we better off? And so that's a question I continually ask. And I think it's very important that if we are to have EROs in our schools, that we know who they are, we know what kind of training that they're getting, and that we can trust that they're going to bring the best professionalism to the job and the situation. So that's a question I'd like everyone to ask. Where are we better off? Are we better off to make sure that those EROs have strong relationships with our kids? So that's some of what I've heard, because it's very important that the superintendent and staff have directions. So we have about 2 minutes of final comments before we turn it over for your summation. Mr. Mertz.
Very quickly, just responding to some things that I heard from people. Ed's suggestion on changing that clause is something that I certainly could live with. I do fear, in some sense, the politics of canceling a contract and reopening to negotiate another contract, as opposed to having a one-year contract and doing the cycles. Speaking of the one-year contract and notions of stability, many of our administrators are on one-year contracts, are non-union professionals or on one-year contracts. We have many people in our district who don't enjoy that kind of stability. So I think that's, I still prefer a one-year contract. Secondly, Anna talked about incorporating things in the BEP, and I think we've worked to do that, and I think we need to continue to work to do that. And in line that, one of the issues that was raised in March was perhaps incorporating, I believe it's policy 4500 into the contract itself, or referencing it within the contract. But if we're talking about limitations on certain offenses that police are not empowered to cite or arrest for, that has to be explicit in the contract. That's not something we can do with our BEP. And so, though I think that bringing them in alignment is very important. And finally, James again used that language, partnership. And I do think that moving this into the partnership policy process in the future would be a good idea. So.
Okay. Any quick comments from the board at this point? Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, just responding to TJ's last point, and I don't know, Luis might have an insight on this. I don't think we can tell the police that they can't arrest someone if they see them breaking the law, can we?
Thank you for asking the question, Ed. Actually, to start with, we do have safeguards within the district in terms of when the police are make the decision to issue a citation or to arrest. We have a document, and I'm sure that you've seen it, recommended best practices and procedures for involving the police, that lays out not only the philosophy of the district, but also talks about these issues, very important issues that are a hot topic across the country, that we want to decriminalize behavior. We don't want police used inappropriately. So we do safeguards. The other safeguard, so it's this document, the other safeguards also built into the behavior education plan document, talks about the limited role of police in schools. So it's also there. We also had Chief Koval and the EROs that attended the Behavior Education Plan Institute when it was first introduced to the district, and he's fully in support of it. And then we have the safeguard that the administrators are there. The administrators work hand in hand with the EROs when a situation reaches a level that may involve a situation of an arrest. So going back to your question, what situations can we think of where we would say to the officer, it's not appropriate to issue a citation or arrest for what? We've already done that to a certain extent in that we have decriminalized the casual possession of marijuana, for example. If it used to be that if a student had a joint in school or a small amount for personal use, that that resulted in a citation. That's no longer the case. That's handled by the school. The officer's role would simply be in disposing of the drugs, but the referral for education, treatment, or whatever, that's a school matter. So we are already headed into that direction, but I can't think of any specific issues where we would say you cannot, for example, the lowest level of arrest would probably be a disorderly conduct citation. But if a student is, Dylan and I got into a fight, and Dylan has gotten the better part of me, but she continues to de-escalate, and the police are, and the school is not able to de-escalate her and make the situation safe. You know, those are the situations that warrant involvement of the arrows and result in citations. So we would have to study that very carefully. I'm not sure that we can do that, but more importantly, I'm just not clear on what types of situations we could define as saying absolutely not, the police are not going to get involved in those. I think that the safeguards that we have in place are much better suited to be able to limit those arrest situations.
So I think to the combined point, so Broward County did negotiate through a multi-group, right? Sheriffs, prosecutors, public defenders, an agreement that non-violent misdemeanors, first offense during the school year would not be issued a citation or arrest. But if you notice, the footnote at each of those is that none of this trumps law enforcement discretion. So I think that goes to Ed's point a little bit, and just managing what that expectation is, because I went back and looked at it, TJ, and thank you for linking to that. It's been a year or two since I looked at it. But even there was that caveat in both the flow chart and I think footnote number 6. It's still documenting mutual expectations as to what the normal operating procedure would be, recognizing that you can't anticipate every circumstance or situation, which is why we've tried to really turn to look at the debriefing, recognizing that we can create clear expectations with each other, but there may be an error in human judgment at some point along the way. And how are we going to reflect on those, come together with trust in a relationship, and not have an incident repeat itself? So that is language we can explore. I think it all hinges on what position the city is to continue to negotiate this contract. TJ, to your point a little bit, because we can bring it all back to the table, and we'll summarize what we hear to bring back to the table in a moment, but it's still subject to negotiations and mutual agreement, and what eventually we can live with or not live with, if it gets added or not to the contract, is really going to be our bottom line when it comes time to vote.
Okay, I'd like to move to the summarization, unless we have a board member who has not spoken that would like to speak. Okay, so if not, let's move to the summarization so we don't get off track here tonight too much.
Okay. I feel like this is a quiz. And yeah, help me out here, Dylan.
Open book.
Yeah, I think that I want to start with the things that seem doable, right, in terms of coming back, right, for negotiations. And then I think there are a couple things where I just need to get clarity from the board before we know exactly what our direction is. Do you want to take a shot at the doable stuff, or should I, Dylan?
So I
Only
heard
because she's more in the contract. than me.
2 primary points that, again, we can bring back for conversation. Whether we will make progress or not, I can't attest to, but it's the term of the contract, the length of the contract, or in the alternative, the terminability of the contract if we can't meet mutual minds, if we think amendments would need to be made in the future, be that to continue to explore cost sharing or to continue to explore the role of EROs in the building as we learn more through the city's review of policing in Madison. So that was kind of an either or, right? And I guess I don't know if there's consensus as to whether we want to go with an easier termination or a 1-year term. But
that wasn't one of the easy ones on my list.
and then the other
I
one
mean,
is
that was- yeah.
limitations of circumstances for issuing arrests and citations. I think that's twofold. What is in the contract with our expectations of how police will respond to primarily nonviolent offenses within schools? And then what do we do ourselves to create clear expectations amongst our administrators and staff as to when it is appropriate to engage police to address student conduct? So I heard something to go back to the table with, and I heard continuing to build and clarify our own practices for administrators. Those were the,
Yeah.
And one of the common themes also was being explicit. I think there's a certain vagueness in the contract. The board members feel there's a certain
Yeah.
vagueness, and somehow we have to be a little more explicit, spell it out, and be a little clearer about some of the things.
Yeah. I think the two things Dylan listed were actually kind of the two things that I think were meatier, substantive. I'm not sure that everybody around this table is exactly on the same page about. I think there are smaller issues that I think, like the complaint idea, right? It's interesting. I think we can look at that. Clarifying public reporting is another example. Those all seem like more concrete, easier things to go back to our team and then the city with. But these two bigger issues, I think the criminalization of behavior issue, I think we fully agree that we need to clarify that we already have some really good guidance that we use that's not captured necessarily in the contract or in the BEP, to Anna's point. I think my only worry about there is timing, right? Like in 2 weeks, can we actually really come to agreement on that, given that Broward County has been working on this for a long time with those partners. There may be some things we can do in the next 2 weeks, and then it might need to be a longer, deeper discussion in this coming year.
Yeah, I
Right?
think-
So that's my only concern. I think we're in agreement, just not sure what all we can accomplish.
I think you're gonna,
Yeah.
my thinking is that you're gonna have to pull something together and get it back to the board prior to, so that the board can review it and get back to you.
Yeah, and I think-
So we see where we are. Otherwise, I think if we get to that meeting for a vote, I think we might have some issues, so.
Agreed. I think I'm just trying to set expectations among the board about what can be accomplished in 2 weeks, and what can be accomplished over a year's time, which kind of gets us to the 1-year contract question. So we'll do some, does that make sense to you, Dylan? We'll try to do some clarifying on this within the existing contract and think about what in addition we can do over time. Does that make sense?
I just want to make 2 quick suggestions,
Yeah.
one of which is look at the Texas statute on limitations, as
Yeah.
well as the Broward County. And in fact, I like the Texas better than the Broward County, because the Broward County is only first offense, and the Texas statute is more blanket on certain offenses. And number 2 is that perhaps bringing the board back, because I think that there is still some uneasiness and disagreement among the board on some of these issues, bringing the board back to multiple versions of a proposed contract, if that's possible, and or certain clauses of the contract.
so it still all hinges on what
The city
the
will
party
agree.
we're
Yeah.
And
negotiating
if the
with.
city won't agree,
It's a
then
negotiation.
we'll know that.
Yeah, I
That's
want
it.
to give Anna
Wait,
a
could you
chance
know?
to weigh, just in case she might have something she hasn't said. Anna?
Yes, yep.
Is there something you'd
I-
like to input here just before we're moving away here? So,
The one thing I would say is, again, I think there is a need for more flexibility and within the contract around the 3-year time period. I think what we're hearing is there's still some things that need to be clarified, maybe a little bit more work to do. So I would just really say I would like to see more flexibility in how long the contract goes. Now, whether we change the language or we make it a shorter contract, I just think it has to be more flexible than how it's written right now. And I would like to see that be proposed when you go back to negotiations.
Okay.
Mr. Hughes.
Yes, very quickly, I think we do need to have a contract before the school's year starts. So maybe it makes sense to try and incorporate like a placeholder paragraph
That's
in
what I'm
there
trying
that
to figure
says,
out.
we'll continue to discuss these issues and the parties agree to amend the contract accordingly if they once they reach agreement on, those
If
2
the
or
city-
3 concerns.
I'm sorry, the city isn't prepared to have a contract before the school year starts. The city doesn't even have it on an agenda till September.
Well, then we don't have to pay them anything starting September 1st.
So, I mean, I think there's some problems here that's a false deadline. If the city isn't going to respect that deadline, then we're kind of out, we're
Yeah,
hanging there.
And that's a good point, but let's focus on the contract here. I mean, we'll
Yeah,
have
we
some
can't
salary
speak for the
savings there,
city.
to your point.
Yeah,
so,
right.
That'd be fine too.
But no
Mr.
officers.
Just
Mr. Loomis.
real quick, I think another thing that should be said here is that behavior that rises to the level of tickets and arrests does not happen routinely. And that speaks to the way we're implementing the BEP and the work of the EROs. It's not at a level that's out of control by any means.
Yeah.
So as we get better at implementing the BEP and staff understand it and work it at a higher level, I think this will all come together. And the ERO part of that, particularly in the relationship building and the restorative justice involvement, is a really significant part to that. So I think that those are positive things that we can draw off of. I also this thing about these 4 areas here of, I just don't, it's so vague and so hard. I don't know how they do these things. I'd really like to know how, the question of our entire country is asking the role of law enforcement
Right.
in community and in educational settings. How do you, we all are asking ourselves that. And how are they supposed to do this? I don't know. Just build the relationships and continue in the restorative justice. That's good enough for me. Let's
The
work on that.
data reflects the fact that we have been doing a little better job.
Yeah.
Our arrest and citation data has been on the decline. If you look at the last 3 years, we like to get it to 0, so we'll
Yeah.
continue to work on it and continue to improve. 5 years ago versus today, we're in a totally different place. So I think that the trend we're on is a good one. We need to stay on it. And final comments.
Yeah, I think, again, our 2 major takeaways, this issue of better defining issues related to the criminalization of behavior and figuring out a way to create flexibility, whether it's a 1-year contract or some other language. We hear our marching orders on that. We don't know what the solution is quite yet, but we'll work on it with the city. Okay.
Well, thanks everyone for your input, and we're only a few minutes over, so thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank everyone for coming. I'm sure there'll be some comments here later, and I'll move adjournment. Second. It's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Or anyone opposed? Motion carries. Anna, 7-0. Meeting's adjourned.
Okay, we'll start with the operations work group in 5 minutes, and anyone who wants to speak,
Yep, yes.
make sure you get your forms in.
That must be confusing to be live streaming and then trying
No.
to talk.
Meeting of the operations work group will come to order now. And let me explain our procedure a little bit. It's a little unusual for us to discuss something before we have the public comments on it. And it was arranged that way because initially we had expected to vote on the ERO contract at the meeting we just completed. And in order to vote, we couldn't have it in our work group meeting, and so that's why there was not planned to be speakers there. But given the public interest in the issue, we have put off the vote until our meeting at the end of the month so that we can hear the comments and take them into account prior to the time we actually act on the contract, which will be then. So we are interested in hearing what people have to say. We have a lot of speakers tonight. About 25 people have signed up to speak. And our rules are that you get 3 minutes. And because of the number of speakers, the number of topics we have to cover, we do have to hold to that 3-minute time limit. So please make sure that your comments fit within that 3-minute time frame. And our first speaker for the evening is Julie Sherwood, and she will be followed by Sue Hoffenberg.
My name is Julie Sherwood, and I am the auto teacher at La Follette High School. And I've worked with Officer Rossetti and Ken Mosley, and I can tell the person who was asking about how do police officers educate our students. And Officer Mosley comes into my classes because I teach auto shop. I've got young boys who are way interested in how they can break the law or how they can squeak around the law. And I bring Officer Mosley in every term to talk to those students so that they have a non-confrontational interaction with a police officer before they get stopped for that green painted license plate light. I've also worked with Officer Mosley. I have a number of students who are special ed students, and I've worked with him a number of times with special ed students who have behavioral issues that are part of their disability. And Officer Mosley has been fabulous with de-escalating situations where administration was asking for more punishment, and he was able to de-escalate that situation. So if you think that we don't need police officers in the school, if we don't have Officer Mosley in the school or someone to take his place, I will be looking for another job. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue Hoffenberg, followed by Liam Menjon.
Hi, I'm Sue Hoffenberg. I'm a retired teacher from the Madison schools. I taught here for 17 years, the majority of the time at West and Memorial. I'm also a retired teacher, so I'm a community member, and I'm looking for the best skills for our students when they're in school and after school. And I can say that Officer Russell Henderson was just terrific, both at West and Memorial. And some of the things that they can do, the officers can do to help with education, is I had a careers class over at West, and Officer Henderson spoke as a career in law enforcement. Issues of safety came up, and he explained to the young women that, talking about safety with some young men, if they were no longer in the relationship, he helped them understand how they can be safe. And he also explained, he helped them understand that officers have families, and that one of the hardest things in his job had been like being called to a party where your cousins are throwing the party, so it helps humanize the officers. Also over at Memorial, I was teaching my self-contained English 11-12 class of communication skills. And the unit was communicating effectively with police officers, principals, and teachers. And Officer Henderson did the role-playing from the role as the student, and the students did the role-playing as the authority, and it was so much fun. And I can say that there was an incident. Teachers are not supposed to get involved in fights. So there's a fight, we're just supposed to call for help. And it just seems like I wouldn't want that if there was my child there. So there was a fight in the hall. I walked between the students. I faced the aggressor, and I'm just making loud, stop, stop. And the student looked me in the eye and punched right over my shoulder. And luckily, Officer Henderson knew the family and knew that they needed support. This went to court, and the family got more support. And the last one I can say is I had a student. He had a clean record. His brother had criminal problems, and the brother was stealing his identity. And it was nice that we had Officer Henderson there who could help him understand what his options were. So for the future of having students who are competent speaking with authority figures on a more comfortable basis, I hope we can keep the officers there on a 3-year contract. I hope we don't make their jobs hard with more paperwork, more contracts, more reviews. Just let them be competent, skilled people is what I'm asking. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I forgot to mention, we have an overflow room in 100A if people don't have enough room here and would like to go there, or you can listen in to what's going on. Next up is Liam, and followed by Sue Pastor.
Hello, my name is Liam Monhone, and I'm a stay-at-home father, mechanical engineer, master plumber, concerned parent. So Basically, first of all, I just wanted to say that I'm a little disappointed to hear that the perspective of that we should not have any police officers in schools whatsoever is not being represented here by the board today. I feel like that's an idea that's prevalent in the community, and I feel like with the board, and I apologize, I came late. Folks may have said that, but I feel like that's something the board should reflect, since that's something that's prevalent in the community. Everything you're saying about close relationships being beneficial for conflict resolution is true, but also that's true with everybody besides just police, right? So if you have close relationships with counselors, et cetera, the same ends can be achieved. So I heard board members talking about how the idea is to get arrests and citations down to 0. I would ask you then, why is it necessary for police officers to be present whatsoever in a school? It doesn't seem to make sense if you wanted to have no citations whatsoever. See, high school age children suffer higher homelessness, poverty, and food insecurity rates than folks that are older than them. They are consistently defecated upon by society, I would argue. When society does this on you, you don't always feel like it is in your interest to follow its rules and values. It makes society seem unfair to you. And why would you want to obey commands and be a good citizen when it's clear that that does not put food on your table or enable you to have a house to live in? When the response to increasing behavior that is demanded, that is deemed unacceptable, is to use coercive force or the threat of coercive force, that's what police are when they're present in schools, you create a pressure boiler situation that disenfranchises these kids even more. The key is not more coercive force or threat of coercive force. The key is to stop defecating on these kids. We need more social services and social safety nets, not more coercive forces. Although it may break down barriers between police and those critical of police, what barriers is it breaking down? By breaking down barriers, what you're really doing is indoctrinating children with pro-police propaganda that ends up turning inquisitive, questioning teens into people who will defend the cops, even though the data clearly shows that police kill and harass black people, black male teens especially, disproportionately, and that they over-police poor communities. You're conditioning children to maintain the brutal and unequal status quo of police activity in America. In a functioning democracy, we do not need citizens to break down barriers with institutions that very clearly are stacked against poor and black people, because that will cause them to stop questioning the brutal nature of the police institution, when questioning and criticism is what needs to be taught. Breaking down barriers between cops and high school students is the same as condoning the status quo, racist, brutal, anti-poor police institution. The police are armed. They are trained in how to physically dominate interactions with citizens and authorized to use force. With varying degrees of subtlety, this colors their every action. Like the possibility of arrest, the threat of violence is implicit in every police encounter. Violence, as well as the law, is what they represent. Late last year, Madison East High School resource officer called the police on a young student who was having trouble with anxiety in the atrium. The student had too much anxiety to go to her class that day and was told to wait outside. And the police were called on her, and the student was brutalized, detained, fined, and suspended. This is not the kind of interactions we need. And even though this is a minority of the interactions with police, the fact that it happens at all is way too much.
Thank you. Okay, Sue Pastor, followed by Ellie Muldrow.
Okay, thank you. I'm extremely grateful that you're giving us the opportunity to speak about this very pressing issue, so thank you. I was here before you in January and heard the testimony of the East High parent whose daughter's situation was just referenced. Since then, I've heard similar stories, equally dramatic, perhaps nothing more dramatic than that particular case. It's really troubling to know that these situations happen, and to hear at the same time people talk about how great these relationships are without acknowledging that young people can be traumatized. I think you have to make policy based on the circumstances of the most vulnerable people and the risk to them. You cannot make policy based on the best case scenarios in this case, because the risk is so high. The financial risk is also high. You know, the city of Madison has just had to add more than $1 million to their insurance pool because of the risk of payments due to conduct by police. So if one is not persuaded by the issue of trauma to young people, think about the financial risk as well. It's extremely important that we're not making our youth more vulnerable to arrest or feeding the school to prison pipeline by having police in the schools. Even one young person in these circumstances is one person too many. As a city resident and a taxpayer supporting MMSD, I want to know what specific educational outcomes can only be met by police in the schools. Mentoring, for example, has to be done by somebody who has a gun. That's not the kind of mentoring that I really want to support. Parents as well as city residents have a right to know what we're getting for the expenditure of police in the schools. There has to be some mechanism for evaluation or assessment. It can't just be because this is what we've done in the past and we like it and we think that some police form good relationships. As Mr. Manhone has just said, relationships can be formed and be supported by staff who are not carrying guns, who are not police, and who may not, in fact, also be as costly. To this issue of the timing of your contract, if you can't get it right, don't do it. If you really need police to come in for specific things, bring them in for those specific things. Create a memorandum of understanding where you ask the police to come to certain classes or hold office hours and be available to certain students during specific times. There has to be a better reason for police in the schools than that they have been there for some time. Is it that staff feel safer? Maybe. We've heard that a little bit tonight, right? If that's the case, we as a community absolutely have to address that. But even so, I ask you to limit the scope and limit the term of the contract a year at the most with these limitations that you're talking about. You have to be able to address all the possible vulnerabilities. That young people will be traumatized, arresting youth for disciplinary infractions, escalation, financial risk. You know what they all are. And I'm grateful for the attention that you've given them so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ellie Muldrow, followed by Ellie Brooks.
It's hard to have our names next to each other because they're spelled the same way. My name's pronounced Ali. My name's Ali Muldrow. I'm the Racial Justice Youth Organizer with the Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools. I work in partnership with the district. I'm not here tonight because I don't admire greatly the leadership of this board and the leadership of this administration. I believe you all have made incredible strides, especially in consideration of the fact that a few years ago, in 2008, African American students had a 38% chance of graduating from high school. We have a long legacy of incredible discrimination in this community, and we need to address it as it is. I work in the Dane County Juvenile Jail every single week as part of my partnership with this school district. The majority of those students are always African American. Always. We're talking about a group of young people that make up 5% of our schools. African American men. LGBTQ students and students who are impoverished are also far more likely to end up incarcerated. And when we incarcerate students, we are acting as if there is some sort of benefit to caging a child, as if it is developmentally appropriate to put a child in a circumstance where they do not have access to sunlight, where they do not have access to their family, where they do not have access to nature, as if somehow they come out of that better. We do have a bubble in this city. We have that bubble for students who are white. We have that bubble for students who are affluent. We have that bubble for students who are able-bodied. We have all kinds of protections. We have all kinds of means of making sure that those students get to the places they need to be. However, we consistently deprive students of color an education in a country in which students of color were enslaved and strategically not allowed to learn. And we are maintaining that by investing millions of dollars in police who promote a discriminatory outcome. I'm here today because I believe it is developmentally inappropriate to subject students to armed police and incarceration while they are at school. I believe that when white students do drugs or make reckless mistakes, we create considerations and solutions that focus on how the child can learn from that mistake. We will use the harshest punishments possible to make examples of students of color, of LGBTQ students, of students with disabilities. That is unconscionable. It is not something we can possibly consider continuing. It is inappropriate and it is cruel. And the fact that it is done on an incredibly and extremely discriminatory basis is something you should all be incredibly concerned with. The fact that we have not talked about the disproportionate impact on students of color extensively as part of this conversation. is something that I think we really need to focus on. I invite any of you to come up to Metro at any point in time so that you can see for yourself what that experience is like. It's awful and it's brutal, and we can do better. I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Allie Brooks, followed by Patrice Hutchins.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Allie Brooks. I'm a mental health worker at Sankofa Behavioral and Community Health. And we are a Black-led mental health agency specializing in culturally specific mental health care in the Black community. So we work with a lot of young people who have mental health struggles and other unmet needs, which manifest as behavioral issues in schools and which lead to police interaction in and out of schools. So we definitely support changing it to a one-year contract and also calling into question the presence of police in schools altogether. We are very, very concerned about unnecessarily criminalizing students that can result from police officers in schools, especially for students of color and students with mental health needs who are disproportionately suspended and referred for behavioral incidents and treated harsher by our criminal justice system. There has been national studies and evidence that an increase in the use of police in schools has obviously correlated with an increase in reporting minor offenses to law enforcement and resulting in formal processing and harsher responses to minor disciplinary situations. This is incredibly concerning given the school to prison pipeline and the fact that once you're involved in the justice system, it's kind of like a hook in your back and it's a revolving door and it's very hard to get out of. And it has incredibly negative consequences for entire families. So we need to be doing everything we can do to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system. I would like to see this report that's being done on the policing specifically around EROs and would need much better evidence that their benefit outweighs the negative impact. I've worked with Officer Rossetti and he's a great person, but and I'm sure that there's police officers in schools who are doing some good, and we can hear many anecdotes all day long, but I just am not convinced that that overshadows the harm and trauma that is caused. We know that only 50% of Black kids are graduating from MMSD, while 50% of African American males between the ages of 20 to 25 are under the control of the Department of Corrections. So there's a very clear school to prison pipeline, what is considered as criminal versus disciplinary problem is very much tied to race. Behaviors of students of color are much more likely to be seen as criminal versus just how kids act. It's incredibly alienating for students of color who have had negative experiences with police in their communities, and they're already feeling alienated in our schools and feel like this isn't their place, and that's part of why only 50% of them are graduating. So I think cops in schools increase that alienation. If we are concerned about safety in schools and prioritizing our children's education, we need not more policing, but adequate mental health care, improved family engagement, and more resources to implement restorative practices. Police will still only be one call away, so if it gets to that point where staff can't de-escalate, police can be called. But we know that their presence leads to unease and tension for students. So I also just want to advocate that money, we have a deeply underfunded school system and social services, and that money be instead funded towards wraparound holistic student services for families. Thank you, and I'm going to pass around my card if anyone has any follow-up questions.
Thank you. Patrice Hutchins, followed by Nino Rodriguez.
Hi, my name is Patrice Hutchins, and I'm a school social worker at La Follette High School, as well as an MMSD graduate of 2005. I see firsthand every day how important to our building EROs can be to our school community and our culture. EROs take the time to know students, the staff, and the culture of the buildings to best support everyone. Having a police officer in the building allows students to have a positive interaction with a police officer, many of them for the first time. It also allows them to ask for support in difficult situations that may happen outside of school that inevitably trickle back into school. They're able to obtain legal advice, and because of the positive relationships that the EROs can build, students often have trust to report potentially unsafe situations. I have a significant concern about the culture and safety of our schools if EROs are removed from the district. First, I do not believe it will lower the rates of arrest, rather increase them. Many students have very complex backgrounds, and sometimes there are very unsafe situations that happen. In those situations, police need to be called. Without an ERO, police officers will come in off the street. They do not know the students, they don't know their needs, and they don't know how to support them appropriately. They will not know the staff members who support them or the complex situations that may be impacting their lives at that time. I believe this will result in more arrests rather than the other way around. Secondly, another positive of having an ERO in the building is the opportunity for students who have a ticket, both received in and out of school, to be pulled into youth court. I've seen this happen countless of times at La Follette, where our ERO supports this process, advocates for these students in the community. When nothing happened at school, they are allowed to have this brought into youth court so that they don't have a ticket. They're doing the opposite of what a lot of people are saying. They are helping keep kids out of the criminal justice system. As a staff member, I remember my first ERO I worked with, Greg Rossetti, continuously bringing a student to me when he was worried about her. She was running away from home, and he knew there was more to the story. He didn't arrest her for running away, even though her parents reported her as a runaway, because he wanted school to be a safe place for her to go. The next Monday, she came into my office and showed us where her parents had been beating her. Additionally, I've watched Ken Mosley, our current ERO at La Follette, sit with students and take a police report when they have been sexually assaulted by their family, by other students in the school, the whole time treating them with dignity and respect as if they were his own daughters. The students often do not want to report incidents like these, but do because they trust him, they know him, and they see him every day helping students at school. With situations escalate at school, I can't tell you how many times he has called me or another staff member to help diffuse the situation because he knows that we have a positive relationship with them. Having EROs can be incredibly important. However, there are many ways we can make this partnership more successful. We must find ways to include our officers and frankly all staff in every building in professional development on dealing with students with disabilities, students with trauma and backgrounds, and making practices that are culturally relevant and more responsive. We must make sure that we are aware of the complex situations that may be impacting our students and that they are immersed in our school, culture, and community, not the other way around. There's a lot of room for improvement in the district, and I think that we can do that, but I don't think removing police is the answer.
Thank you. Nino Rodriguez, followed by Serena and Shadaira Flores.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a 10-year Madison resident, a parent of a child who formerly was in Madison schools but isn't any longer with special needs. So sort of speaking with a little bit of experience in Madison schools, but not currently a parent of a Madison schools student. Also speaking from a perspective of professionally being a policy analyst who works on social welfare policy and trying to keep people out of jail who interact with family court systems. So I'm not wearing my professional hat here tonight, but am wearing my community member and activist hat. And involved in a couple different organizations that are concerned with trying to, I guess, exert more community power over police policy and how police operate, both in the community as well as in the schools. To address the contract directly, I think the thing that most concerns me probably is whether the aspects of having police in school that don't directly involve law enforcement really need to be done by Madison Police, or if it can be better performed by other helping professionals of a variety of kinds, potentially. And calling that into question and whether or not thinking that through might lead to the conclusion that perhaps, as many community members as well as national organizations have called for, that police should not be in schools. So to take the items point by point, to the best that I can remember them, for example, who would be the best resource to provide to young people in terms of interacting with law enforcement and knowing what their rights are? Is it a law enforcement officer who is under obligation to enforce the law and potentially use information that a student discloses in developing probable cause and an arrest and potentially evidence in a future case? Or is more appropriate and perhaps more desirable a person to provide those education services both to students and I'd say as well as staff and parents, perhaps a representative of the ACLU, or it could be even GSAFE, or there are potentially other organizations, private attorneys, attorneys who specifically advocate for the rights of children and are coming at it from the perspective of their rights that might potentially need to be defended, as opposed to violations that they might potentially make which need to be enforced by the law. Other examples might relate to AODA. Why pay MPD officers to do alcohol and other drug education with students? Is that really the best person to hire to perform those services? I would also really specifically call into question the idea that Madison police officers are best positioned to provide conflict resolution education to your staff, considering it's coming from the perspective of people who have the fallback of weapons and guns and are required to use them in certain situations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Serena and Shadira?
Good evening. My name is Shadira Kilfoy Flores, and I am a former graduate of the East High School. Shabazz High School, in fact, is where I graduated from, but East was my home school. So I personally, and also being the parent of a recent graduate from East High School, so I have much perspective, the gamut of perspective, being a student of color, the parent of a student of color, and in the Madison School District. I guess my concern comes in with the amount that we're paying these officers. Why are we paying these officers $90,000 apiece? Close to $90,000 makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, especially when we are already cutting up healthcare. You know, the nurses, we don't have, nurses are having to go between schools. I have a son at Lapham, so I know that the nurse shares her time between Lapham and Marquette. If we have professionals who have put in years of education that their job has to go between schools, why can't these officers split their time up between La Follette and East and West and Memorial? And for us to figure out a way to be able to cut the spending, we need to invest in our kids, not invest in the police. This money could be much better spent with mental health services. We know that our children are not given adequate mental health. They're not being given adequate access to the arts. They're not being given adequate access to a plethora of resources. So I guess, my concern is, why are we doling out close to $90,000 for officers apiece to come into our schools? That amount needs to be cut immediately. That is ridiculous. The MPD is given millions and millions of dollars. So, this needs to be looked at. It should be a 1-year contract, if that, and the cost needs to be cut drastically.
Thank you.
My name is Serena Flores. I'm a current graduate at East High School and currently accepted into UW-Madison. So yeah, this is my community. I'm part of the Williamson Street community, part of the East High community, part of Latino Union, part of BSU. So it's like, this is my community. These are my people who this affects. And so I'm not on the fence of like either or. I think police are a good idea for keeping my environment safe. If there's somebody else who comes into our school and affects our school, I think police are good to keep the community inside of the school safe. But I personally don't feel safe when the police are in my school, if that makes sense. Like, I advocate for unarmed officers. I definitely agree with this woman who said that, police coming in and advocating education and, advocating for the kids that they can confide and come talk to those officers. I think that's amazing. But within my school at East, I don't feel that way. I feel very intimidated by the police, in all honesty. I feel like intimidated the way they walk around. They actually keep their hands on their hips. They don't give off a friendly presence at my school. At my school, I feel more, when I pull up and the police officer has already parked on the sidewalk before, I feel more intimidated that we have armed officers in our school. So I honestly advocate for unarmed officers. If your goal is to come in and educate children and keep children in an environment where they feel safe, then they should be there to do that. But they don't need to be there armed to do that. We have security guards. We have security guards to un-escalate situations. I feel like that's what they are for. That's what their position is being paid for. I feel like I have a great relationship with those security guards. Those are the people who know me by name, know the kids by name. Hey, say, like, what's up? Goof around with the kids. I can promise you the police officer at my school, at East in particular, that's not the body language or the presence they give off. So I also encourage, training your officers to do that. You're interacting with young people. Yes, we're adults and you want to transition us into becoming adults, but they're still interacting with kids. I did see a situation where there was a young woman who didn't go to class, and it was crazy to just watch it because you can't do anything about it. And they sat there and they handcuffed her. They, her body language wasn't threatening. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't fighting anybody else, but yeah, she wasn't going to class. So figure out, get counselors, get other people engaged to figure out why isn't that young woman going to class. But for her to be arrested, because yes, she's being defiant to law, but why isn't she going to class? What's her circumstances? Talk to her. Get other counselors down there. Not the first person you call is the officer. So I don't advocate for either or. I'd like to feel safe in my past environment, but it's like at the same time, it's not an environment where I feel safe.
Great, thank you.
Stop criminalizing our youth.
Okay, Emily Patak-Pressman, followed by Leland Pan. Emily here?
Apologies. I was in the overflow room, which, just so you all know, is filled with people who really want to speak to you all and who have a lot to say on this matter, so I hope that you will continue to listen. My name is Emily Patak-Pressman. I am a 2013 graduate of Madison East High School, and I really am coming here today to urge you, like this young woman was just saying, I hear you, and I experienced it in a different way. I would pull up to East High School, see that police parked every single morning, and think about, for me, that wasn't a huge impact. I could go to school. I knew that I was not going to be targeted as a white student. But I knew that my friends of color, when they came to school and saw that car parked there, saw police officers with guns when they got to school, I knew the impact that that had. They didn't feel like they could have an education where they felt free to really learn the way that I was learning, and the way that I felt safe. So I really urge you to think hard about this. There are alternatives to policing. I think the idea of police not having guns is a good one if we feel that we need to have this one-year contract. I think that could be a good stipulation. And yeah, I just want you to think hard. There's a whole, like I said before, community here who's showing up today who has really serious concerns about our schools, our community schools. And I'm disappointed, to be honest, that this school board, which I do have a lot of respect for, and I have seen made impressive changes in this district in my time in school and both now as a graduate. I'm disappointed that I haven't heard you all taking seriously alternatives to policing, and I would really encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Leland Pan, followed by Chantel Taylor. Oh, I'm sorry. Geez.
Everyone, my name is Leland. I am a graduate student at UW-Madison in social work. I also teach at the university. My field education involves working for the Dane County Community Restorative Court. So I work in restorative justice. I work with 17 and 25-year-olds, and all of my 17-year-old clients are from the Madison School District, and I believe all of them were arrested on school grounds by the school officer. So I do have some experience in interacting with the people on the receiving end of the educational resource officers. And with that perspective, I think that moving to a place where police officers are not in schools regularly is a better goal to have. And I'll go into it. As an aside, I also want to point out, working both in the university and on the south side, that if you at all have any skepticism about the disparate impacts that policing has, if police officers interacted with my black and brown clients if the police interacted with my college students the way they interacted with my black and brown clients, your jail would be 90% white. So, perfectly clear, everything I've seen my black and brown clients do, I see college students do with impunity every day. So, I do want to point that out. What I see is that there are definitely, all of my clients do have major human service needs, major things going on in their life. And certainly through our program, we try our best to connect them to the appropriate services, and it may sometimes be the first time they've been connected to certain services, but it seems to be a particularly roundabout way to try to get them to connected to the right services through the criminal justice system, which is inherently heavy-handed, which is inherently punitive, which is inherently unbalanced in terms of the power dynamics. The choice is to succeed or have your life ruined, possibly forever, right? So it seems like a waste of money to try to go through a roundabout way that disproportionately hurts certain groups of people, and while it would seem to be a more efficient use of your time to just directly funnel people to said services, and not only that, but you would also save money for said services. Working in social work, the running joke is that there's obviously no money in social work, right? There's no money in services. There's no funding for these things. But we constantly see funding for the criminal justice system, for public safety. And sometimes we joke that the best social work gigs are in policing, right? Because the police department keeps expanding and creating these positions that they claim to be social work-esque in nature. The truth is that police officers can't be social workers. Police officers have a gun, they have a badge, they have the power to arrest. That inherently changes the dynamic of their interaction with people. As a social worker, it's my job to respect people's autonomy. It's my job to empower them. It's not my job to tell them what to do. And that's the difference.
Thank you. Sharice Taylor, followed by Shira Hall.
So the mics are working, right? Because, okay. I can really hear them. Okay, so my name is Shanice, and I am going to be a senior at West. So if anything, you guys should be getting my opinion out of anyone's. Speaking since I'm a kid, and I feel like I should have a very big impact on the policy, as well as just police officers being in the school in general. I just have like personal experiences. My friend was going to get in a fight, and it didn't happen, but she got a ticket for it. So she got a ticket for not a fight, but attempting to get into a fight, which I didn't know was a thing, really. So of course that's now like police officers do have a very huge impact, as you can see in that case. That's on her record forever. So she's has something on her record for something that she didn't even do yet, and that's with her forever. So that will basically affect her life. So we're speaking about Dane County having the second highest arrest rates for juveniles in America, and 6-to-1 ratio. So I heard someone talking about enforcing the criminalization of people of color, and if that tactic continues, then the ratios will definitely increase, and it will be worse disparities than there are now. And I'm going to assume that blacks are, obviously, they are the most impacted if they are filling up majority of the jails. And that's people who should be speaking up here. People, if you are having the what's my word? If you're having the intention of changing their lives, then you should probably be trying to get their opinions, if you really care to change it in a positive direction, that is. And I'm repeatedly hearing about Officer Rossetti, I think, And yeah, he sounds like a great person, but do you think that one officer playing basketball and handing out ice cream to black children and children of color will fix an oppressive system that they have to suffer from? Where will that cop be when another cop pulls them over, when another cop shoots them, when another cop tries to arrest them? You won't always see them there. And even in the cases when they are playing sports or giving out ice cream or whatever, they still have their belts on, they still have guns on their hip. So what is that supposed to show children? Like, what is that? You're supposed to protect me, but you know, you're carrying a gun around. And let's not lie, there are tensions here, so it's gonna be expected that people have that thinking pattern. And lastly, I just want to say, how about putting money into preventing problems before that actually happen? Thank you.
Thank you. Shira Hall, followed by Paxton Yang.
Okay. So, my name is Shira Hall. I'm a youth staff at Freedom Wings. I'm against police because it's pointless to have them in my school. I'm a black student at Memorial High School. And I've seen police harassment to my friends, students, just because coming to school late because missing the bus. When I was 15, a 19-year-old white boy that was a senior punched me and I punched him back. But I was the one that was targeted by police to be picked up and carried to principal's office. And when my dad got there, he came to come see if I was okay, and he was followed by the police because they said that he was real angry. This is why I am against the contract. To me, it seems like seems like it's a school prison type one.
Thank you. Paxton Yang, followed by Neil Rainford.
All right. Well, hello. My name is Paxton Yang, and I'm with Freedom Inc. and I go to Madison West High School and going to be a junior. And I am against having police in our school because it's not really comfortable for students to have police there for full time. Also, a lot of students get affected because of our race, and because we know that kids of color are targeted by the police all the time. So that's all I gotta say.
Thank you. Neil Rainford, followed by Mary Riddle. Nobody? Well,
He was here earlier.
well, if he comes back, we can let him in. Pardon? Yeah, Mary Riddle? All right. No Mary Riddle. How about Kirsten Audie? Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Kirsten Audi. I am a teacher, 8 years in the district at, 7 at Nuestro Mundo, 1 at Sandburg. Before that, I taught in LAUSD for 4 years, so I've seen, at a middle school, and I've seen, a war zone. school, and I've seen one of the best in the district that I love working at. I'm working at Cherokee this year as a bilingual resource teacher. I also grew up here in Madison. I'm very invested. My son will hopefully be going to one of our great schools, and I'm still exploring this issue myself. I'm not fully decided, and at the same time, I do think that I have a unique perspective as a parent and teacher, and I think about what I would want my son to experience and what I would feel safe, who I would feel safe putting my child in the hands of every day. And the truth is, when I've had to call for backup, even as an elementary school teacher or as a middle school teacher, it's often because I run out of tools in my toolbox. And what I really think would be the best way to invest in our children's safety would be in prevention through investing in our teachers' toolboxes, in our parents' toolboxes, in our administrators' toolboxes, giving them skills, knowledge, understanding to prevent the sorts of issues that we're having that are eventually requiring police backup in the schools. I've been trained in a lot of different professional development, and I would recommend all teachers get it. I know that a lot of the behavior plan requires these skills, and yet a lot of the teachers don't have the training required to implement the bullets in the behavior plan. So for example, responsive classroom. I've taken all of the training I possibly could for responsive classroom, made a huge difference in my teaching, and that's coming from a strong toolbox in classroom management and whatnot. Mindfulness training, developmental designs. I wrote down some other ideas. Welcoming schools, second step. I've taken all of this training. Restorative justice is one I would like to try this year. Culturally and linguistically responsive practices, turning our schools into community schools. All of these things I think would make a much bigger difference. And I actually calculated with what I know about my understanding of extended employment. It's about $11.25 or something an hour. I know I've worked hours and hours over the summer for no pay, just doing work on my own, or with extended employment. And if we gave teachers incentive to do the training in the summer, even with $11 an hour, we could send 818 teachers to get 40 hours of training every summer versus, and that I think we get a lot more bang for a buck that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Wayne Strong. Okay. Okay. But they're ready to speak after this? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Strong. I am a retired Madison Police Lieutenant. I am also a father of kids who've gone through the district, as well as a two-time school board candidate. And I feel like I have a lot invested in this district. And in 1998, I was among the first EROs to be hired at West High School. We started on a rotational basis, myself and 4 other officers, and it was the same way at East La Follette as well as Memorial. And what we did was we each on a daily basis, we went into the classrooms, we connected with teachers, we connected with students, and that was really the goal. Was the engagement piece of this was absolutely critical for our officers to be able to go into the schools and break down some of the barriers that currently exist within, with police in the community. And I think that for me, the years that I worked at West was very rewarding. I bonded with a lot of students. I felt like they could come to me when they had issues that didn't relate to school at all, a lot of personal issues, social issues. And so we had that connection, and I think that piece is very critical, and I think that's really the goal of what the ERO program should be about, is connecting with our young people, teaching them and showing them, being proper role models, talking to students about their rights and responsibilities, and all of that is critical to I think their success and their future. I've also had the privilege of supervising a number of EROs, and I think over the years the department has had some really good EROs, and I'm certainly fully aware of the issues that have been raised here, and I'm very sensitive to particularly issues of racial disparities, as well as criminalizing behavior that does not need to be criminalized. I know there were a lot of times in the schools where, for some reason, we would have a situation where a teacher or a staff person in general would have an altercation with the student. The student would end up getting getting suspended, and on top of that suspension, a ticket was requested by either the staff person or the officer just decided to write the ticket. And I always pushed against that because it's double jeopardy. You're essentially charging a kid twice for the same offense, and that is purely wrong. And so I think that as long as there's specifically behavioral education plans that address behaviors within the school, that's a school issue, that the officers are not in the schools like they are in the community. So if there's policies in the school that address disturbances, and the student's going to be suspended, that's the punishment. It ends right there. An officer should never be in a position where they feel inclined or feel obligated in any way to issue a citation above and beyond that school suspension. And that's something I think that certainly needs to be addressed. I think the overall goal of the program, though, is to get into the school, into the classrooms, connect with students, and I think there's a huge benefit with that. And over the years, I heard Officer Russell Henderson's name mentioned. I actually supervised Russell when he worked at West High School, and he got a lot of support from the staff as well as principals there. So I think that the program is something we need to continue, at least on a one-year basis, and tweak it and make it better for everybody.
Thank you. Okay, and Neil Rainford, I think, is here now, or Mary Riddle.
Good evening. My name is Neil Rainford. I'm the representative for the AFSCME employees here at the district, the custodial maintenance employees and the food service employees.
Neil, before you get started, can I just let people know that I think we're done with the speakers on the police, the ERO issue, and we're kind of switching to a different topic now. We have a number of speakers on the AFSCME contract, but we appreciate everyone who took their time to share their views with us on the EROs. And okay, and your name is? Okay, well, let's take a look.
And Ed,
okay.
with the people in the overflow room, I would like to take a very brief break and just actually set my eyes on who's there. And I think that if they came out, we should at least see them. And very short break to do that before they leave.
Well, it looks like we do have a couple, I'm sorry, it looks like we do have a couple more on the EROs, so I apologize. Evelyn, is that? Yeah. And then we have Stormy Stipe as well, and Edwin Barrera, I believe.
My name is Evelyn Kildrey-Voiles. I am currently a preschool teacher. I have taught drama to students from ages 3 to 17 in classrooms in New Jersey and Illinois. In New Jersey, I taught in Trenton and Newark. I say that because I taught in schools where there were not police officers, there were security officers, and I was expected and able to deal with classrooms where middle school students threw chairs. I'm not saying that's ideal, but that's what happened. And that's background on me. I have a student at Cherokee Middle School. It is my understanding that there used to be EROs in Tokay and Sherman Middle School, and they had been removed when their contract ended. I think if we want to know what happens when EROs leave schools, we could look to what happened with those schools, whether the arrest rates or the ticket citations went up or if they went down. My concern is that as a school board and as a city and as parents, we are letting fear of what might happen, fear of gang violence, fear of, I've heard not in the actual discussion here, but sort of on the sideline, Sandy Hook put up, that we are letting fear of what might happen, fear of large tragedies, create small tragedies every day for students of color. That because we are scared of large looming events, that we allow small, for us, traumatizing for student of color events to happen every single day. And I do not want my white child's safety to be the cause of his black friends and classmates' trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. Stormy Stipe?
Hi. I do appreciate the work you guys are doing, and I voted for many of you. I appreciate you. I have to say, I'm the mother of a black boy. He's 10 years old. He is very tall for his age. He looks like a teenager. He acts like a teenager because he wants to be a teenager. I am a college professor. I am married to a college professor. We are white. Our son is black. Recently, they put officers in the YMCA. I'm a member of the YMCA. We were there on a Friday night. The officers arrived. I suspended our membership. I didn't want my son around that, and I will tell you why. Someone earlier talked about boundaries. My son was playing foosball with 4 officers, and he said to the officer, "I'm gonna cream you." And they laughed. That would not fly. I can't have my son palsing around with officers who have guns. I'm frightened, and I actually, quite frankly, am very disappointed in the meeting that I heard. Granted, I'm not here on a regular basis. I don't know what all you guys have discussed, but the fact that you weren't talking about race and ethnicity more is deeply disturbing to me. We don't have to try to sit around here and decide that, oh, police officers have a bias that they're actually not even aware of, that I have biases that I'm not even actually aware of, that I am racist, that we're all racist. We don't really need to decide that. We pretty much already know it, okay? So what I want to know, I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse here. How are we're talking about educating children. We're talking about educating teachers. We're talking about educating staff. How are we going to educate the officers? That is the problem, and it's systemic, and it's not just in the schools. I will tell you something. My child is homeschooled, and I will also tell you why he's homeschooled. He went to kindergarten and first grade in this district, and we took him out. We both have full-time jobs. We're college professors, and yet we homeschool. We homeschool because of the racism that we saw in the school. We did not want our child given the kind of narrative that he was being given. He was frequently told that he could end up in jail. He was frequently told that the resources and the programs that are going on at the Y, they do this all the time. They say, keeping them off the streets. That's what they say about the black children. Keeping them off the streets. We're doing a good thing for them. The other thing is, I am teaching my child not to trust police officers because I want him to stay alive. If police officers behave differently, if I have, as a parent, trust in police officers interacting with my child in the way that they would interact with him if he were white, I would teach my child to trust police officers. This is ridiculous, by the way. I oppose this so much, I can't even, I know my time.
Thank you. Okay, Edwin Barrera.
Good evening. My name is Edwin Barrera, and I am a former graduate at East High School, and I'm I was former president of the East High School Latino Student Union. And looks like I've had a different experience than what most people have had here. I want to highlight the importance of programs developed to connect officers with youth. And I want to specifically point out Amigos en Azul. I don't know if that's a program you are all familiar with, but it's a program that is aimed specifically for officers to work with Latino youth and other colored children. This made me feel safer around officers, and made me build a connection with them as well. Supporting the youth and taking part in programs such as these for the sole purposes of younger students feeling safer around law enforcement, I think would benefit the community overall. I'd also like to point out specifically Officer Franco at East High School. Even though she has been there for only 1 year, she has demonstrated that she wants to be part of the community and that she wants to help us rather than, issue us a citation or take us to jail, whatever the case may be. I'm sure one of the MMSD's top priorities is student safety, so the presence of officer at a school would give a chance for students to get along with officers and build an essential bond that I can sure will decrease criminal behavior. To sum it all up, ERO's presence in a school would build a connection with students and assist the staff strictly when the situation has escalated and school staff can no longer do anything to de-escalate the matter at hand. The issue isn't how the situation is handled, but how the situation can be prevented in the future and have it no longer happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now that, I believe, completes our speakers on the ERO issue. And I do think we got to keep going here. So our next speaker is Neil Rainford.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. So, as was mentioned, I hope we transition now to the question of the handbook language with regard to the custodial maintenance and food service employees. And my name's Neil Rainford. I'm a representative for those two groups of employees here at the district. And as directed by the board some year or so ago, we've met with the administration over the course of the last year. And for our part, we took a look around, made a good faith effort to work with the administration to try to find a system that would work for everyone. And while we're closer than we were last summer around this time, we're not quite there yet. We urge you to reject the proposal that the administration is advancing and to instead adopt a proposal that we've been advancing to the administration and to the board now for the past several months. And the way we arrived at this system is we took a look around the district and tried to see what was working. And what we found was that the computer technician employees within the organization had a good system that relied on employee certification for advancement to promotional opportunities. And so based on that model, we developed a few more elements to it. One is that we propose to partner with the district to develop a new recruiting, training, and hiring procedure to ensure a diverse workforce. We do that through working we propose to do that through working with the Big Steps program here in town that has a lot of experience and can help us do that together with the district. The second is that we restrict promotional consideration only to those employees who have acquired through training and testing the core competencies that they need to advance within the organization. So when an employee moves up, for example, from the worker positions to the maintenance positions, they will have, to be considered for that, they will need to have taken the core training to be ready for that job. And the third is that we have heard what the district's administration asked for in terms of some flexibility and looking at the highest level leadership positions within the custodial maintenance and the food service positions. And what we've said is that on the custodial maintenance side, for example, the highest level custodial maintenance employee who oversees the building, the high school buildings, that one we've proposed that the district would look both internally and externally because they said that's a particularly important position to have some flexibility to make sure they get the right candidate in that position. Now, There are, so I think I'll leave it there, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on this issue.
Thank you. Mary Riddle. Followed by Tanya Waller.
Hi, my name is Mary Riddle, and I've seen district issues from the political side, the parent side, and yours as a custodial employee. When my kids were little, I was in the 80s. Federal government ordered us to DSEG. It was part of the integration team, monitoring team, planning team, presidents of a couple PTOs, PCAC, and so I've seen how things need to work with the district for things to succeed. And I've been a maintenance worker at La Follette High School for 2 high schools, La Follette lately, for 5 years now, and I'm a woman that's in a job that's a man's job, and traditionally. And I was trained on the job. I didn't have the experience that I do now because there wasn't a framework for it. I really feel privileged to have been able to do that in that kind of a situation. But now we have an opportunity to help not just myself, but other people that are trying to come up through the ranks. From the time my kids were little, the school district was trying to figure out how to recruit minority employees and retain them. And it still isn't, we're still trying to do it. That's 25 years later. Something's not working, and if it can't be done from the top down, I suggest you guys work with us to help it happen from the bottom up by our union reps and Neil, and with some input from you guys, have developed this core concept system which equalizes the playing field so that people that are hired begin to have the same opportunities to be trained for some positions that they maybe they didn't have to do carpentry before. They'll get some basic carpentry experience so that they're able to move up with seniority and job competency into the next position. And I think there are a lot of people that come into the system as at the bottom of the pay scale that need those opportunities, and that's how we're going to diversify the workforce more quickly. I don't know how you guys are going to do it from your end, because I know it's been a job that's been going for a long time. And the core competency will help both sides of the issue. It'll help us because our employees will have an opportunity to advance, but you also know that when someone's applying for jobs, that they're capable, we're not wasting your time, and you can see that we have a respect for our jobs, we have an appreciation for our jobs, and you can see that play out with this kind of a situation. I really like the idea that women and people of color and people from all kinds of backgrounds would be able to have experience we haven't in a systematic way provided them, to guarantee them the opportunities that they have that they wouldn't have on their own. So thank you.
Thank you. Nicely timed. Tanya Waller, followed by Fabian McMurray.
I was hired in February of 2003. I currently work at Elvium Elementary as a custodian worker 2, and I've been in this position since September of 2012. Prior to coming to Madison Metropolitan School District, I worked as a custodian for a small school district near Madison. Due to the size, the chance for promotion was very slim. I accepted the entry-level position with MMSD in large part for their upward mobility that would be possible. I would have the opportunity to train and promote to higher positions, including maintenance and head custodian of buildings. Since the switch from seniority-based interviews, seniority-based promotions to interview-based awarding of positions, I have reached a glass ceiling. I have applied and been passed over for many promotions as well as some lateral moves. I am not one that does particularly well in interviews. It's not that I'm not qualified, it's nerves. Basing one's potential performance on a subjective interview is short-sighted and potentially biased. This proposal to start hiring for positions above a range 11 from outside is also short-sighted. Why go to the outside when you currently have several dedicated long-term employees of whom you know their work history and their work ethic? Hiring from the outside also does not make sense, as candidates can say anything in an interview and you simply must take them at their word. Offering proper training of MMSD current and dedicated custodial staff, however, does make sense, as our work history is well established. Not to mention, many of us long-term employees are likely not to quit to seek other opportunities elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabian McMurray, followed by our last speaker, Richard Nelson.
Hello, I'm Fabian McMurray. I'm a 1995 graduate of the Madison School District, and next month I'll be celebrating my 19th year of employment with MMSD, so pretty much right out of high school. When I was 32, I was awarded a maintenance position within the district. Like Mary, with no previous background in maintenance. And I reveled in it. I had no idea I was mechanically inclined or loved to fix things until I was afforded the opportunity to show that I was capable and competent in doing so. Shortly after that, we went to an interview-based system, and the first two building positions I applied for were given to men that had less seniority than me, and one of them didn't even know how to turn on a boiler. And it took me a while to kind of figure out that interview system. And I just feel that when you have a subjective base, that people's biases do come out as much as they try to suppress them. So therefore, I think that this system that my comrades put together, that is not only seniority based but also based on training, would give the best opportunity for my brothers and sisters to have the opportunity that I had to show, that we can do the work, that we're capable and dedicated, and want to be there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our last speaker of the evening is Richard Nelson.
Good evening. It's been a long day. I'm a 19-year veteran of the Madison School District. Currently, I'm the head custodian at Marquette O'Keefe Middle School. I'm a proud union steward and a member of ASME Local 60. It is vitally important for the health and well-being of your workforce that we ensure that all employees have the opportunity to compete fairly and equitably for all promotions through a just and transparent process. Going forward, all employees who are considering promotions need a means to gain access, to acquire and develop the necessary skills, and to move up the career ladder. The proposal that we have made to you, counter to the administration's proposal, does this by embracing training and education as the heart of our proposal. Our proposal gives the workforce greater opportunity by embracing this training as a vehicle to move up that career ladder so that people can aspire to growth and fulfillment. The administration's proposal limits opportunity for employees to move up the career ladder, stifling any incentive to train and better themselves and leaving them in a dead-end job circus. I don't think it comes as any great surprise that morale is a huge problem within the custodial and food service units. We have not had a meaningful raise in over 7 years. Our purchasing power has declined 20 to 25% during this time. Many of our schools are open now from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and we must service that. We are asked to do more continually with less resources. We are servicing more students They are introducing community schools now as something new that we have to service. There are more permits that are being issued, more programs to service from MSCR. There's more food delivery that's being handled by us. Breakfast, lunches, snacks, and even dinner in some cases, and then we're serving them not only at the schools but at different satellite locations. More and more summer programs. There was 7, I believe, summer school program 3 years ago, and then it was 14, and this year I believe it was 21 summer school programs, and it looks like down the road it will be increasing again. The school district has made several additions at schools, creating more space to clean and to maintain, yet they have not hired any additional staff. Staffing levels is a major problem in these schools, creating unsafe working conditions for our workforce. Many of these situations come as a result of Scott Walker's policies. Act 10, the war against public workers and public education. But we have endured all those. We have come to expect this from Scott Walker and his cronies, but we didn't expect this from our own administration. I want to close by saying, be careful of the message you are sending to your workforce by this action. Your workforce is your greatest asset. Adopt our proposal, not the administration's proposal. Invest in your workforce, grow your workforce, and you will not be disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our public speakers, public appearances portion of the meeting. Next on our agenda is approval of the minutes, and I move to approve the minutes of the Operation Work Group meetings for June 13th and July 18th, 2016.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Amaya, your advisory vote? Aye. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? That passes 7-0. Next up is discussion of the ASME Employee Handbook.
Should I take it away, Ed?
Please do.
All right, thank you. Deirdre Hargrove, Krieghoff, and Chad Weezy are going to join us and lead this portion of our discussion tonight. Oh, and Heidi. Oh, I'm sorry, Heidi. Come on up, Heidi. And Heidi. So I think I'll just go ahead and pass it over to them. This is a follow-up from a discussion we had about a year ago, where the board asked us to try to work something out with AFSCME, and we're back to talk about where we've arrived. So, Deirdre.
Yeah. So you've all seen the memo. I just want to take about 5 minutes just to do kind of a quick overview to kind of bring us to where we are now, and then I think we can open it up for discussion. So I just want to harken back and remind the board that we entered into handbook development discussions during the summer of 2015. We met several times during that summer, and through a collaborative process, we were able to successfully develop our first handbook with our union partners, with the exception of this one open item. This is the item that we could not come to consensus on at that point, and it was really the ability to look at internal and external candidates across all units. Now, if you remember our teacher unit, we did transition to being able to look at internal and external candidates simultaneously about 2 years ago. So our recommendation was put forward to the board in August of 2015, and at that time we were asked to go back and into discussions to see if we could come up with a compromise. Some of the concerns around that initial proposal or recommendation was the fact that we did not have a really strong, robust professional development and training process for our staff. So with that in mind, we went back. We had some discussions over this last school year. We met several times, but we were still not able to come to full agreement. Our recommendation as it stands is that we want the ability to look at candidates in the upper ranges, and typically we're looking at ranges 12 to 16, from both internal and external pools. We originally proposed all positions, but we wanted to provide a compromise, and therefore we put forth the recommendation that was in the memo. And that's really taking a look at and separating out positions that were ranging in grades 1 through 11 and leaving our practice essentially as status quo. And so that really means looking at internal candidates only. And where there is similarities or equal candidates in those positions, seniority would prevail. But we wanted to have an opportunity to look at positions in grades 12 through 16 where we were looking at internal and external candidates simultaneously. Why do we want to do this? It's really a simple one-sentence reason for our team, and that's really we want the ability to access candidates both internally and externally. We want the ability to hire the best candidate for the position. It's just as simple as that. Now, through our discussions, we were able to come to some agreement on some things, and so this the agreements that we had was partially from the discussions that we had during the summer handbook process, as well as the discussions that we had over the year. We could agree, and we acknowledged as a team back in the summer that we didn't have a really robust training and development program. And at that point, we committed that we were going to look at that, and we were going to commit to develop training and professional development, and that work has started. We also agreed that we would like to see our internal candidates develop and transition into those next level positions. I think there's a perception when we're having this conversation about being able to look at internal and external candidates simultaneously, that automatically means that we're only going to be looking at external candidates, and that just is simply not true. In our teacher pool this year, 40% of the candidates that were hired into new positions were teachers that were internal transfers. 50% of those folks that sought those transfers were interviewed and hired for those positions. So it just is not the case, and I know that there was some concern around that. Where we couldn't reach agreement is around the role that training and seniority play in selecting candidates for designated positions. So we believe, and we strongly believe, that training and experience can play a role in supporting and readying our internal candidates for leadership positions. But we do not agree that seniority should be the sole predictor of someone's ability to lead within their unit. We also believe that training and development is a shared responsibility between the district and the administration, the district administration and the individual staff person. We feel it's important that staff be able to demonstrate their competence when transitioning to next level positions. So training and seniority, the years on the job, certainly play an important role in readying yourself for the next transition, but it cannot be, and it should not be, at least in our opinion, an automatic that says you should be availed the next position. I want Chad to take just a minute or two just to talk about his experience moving through this process in this last year, the current process and the potential barriers that he's experienced as a hiring authority, and kind of contrast that with what we're proposing.
I think quite simply is maybe just kind of tell a story of an elementary school that we worked on a hire just this past year for a head custodian, and I could tell you that we had a principal that really cared about getting a quality person in a position where they had an absolute all-star that retired, and we were in a spot that we could only send applicants that applied for what was a fairly needy elementary school position for this principal to consider, because we couldn't send this principal applicants from the outside. And quite honestly, the principal wasn't wild about the applicants that they were able to consider for the position. And I, in a way, harken back to my role as a principal at La Follette, where I lived in both places. That there were times that if I had a science opening and we had a science teacher from within the district that met minimum qualifications for that science position that I was kind of bound by contract to offer them a position. And I took every hire very seriously and took it as an opportunity to make La Follette better. I lived in the other world where I've had a chance to hire two of the most amazing science teachers that the district's ever seen from the outside, and have honestly turned the science department at La Follette High School on its head. They're so good. And never would have had that opportunity with the old language. And that being said, I hired some amazing teachers that were internal transfers that came to La Follette in their time. And I see our principals and our communities in the same position, that there will be top quality internal transfers that come from our own custodial unit. And it's my goal, leading that department, to make sure that they're as qualified as possible when they apply for these positions. But that being said, I think I owe it to our principals and our teachers and our kids to make sure that every single time we have an opening in the district, that we have a chance to hire the very best person to serve our kids and community. End of story. I hope you wouldn't want anybody else that would say anything different.
Can you guys provide a little clarification in terms of the dividing line you identified? Like, what is the nature of the position that are the ones that, for which external candidates would be considered, and what are the numbers? How many below that and how many above that, and what kind of pay scale are we talking about?
I can give you a snapshot of that. So level 12 through 16, those are essentially the positions in our district that you're in charge of leading other personnel and delegating work and problem solving and differentiating times where you have a fire to put out here and another smaller fire to put out here, and you've got teachers here and principals here and parents, and all of a sudden you've got to make decisions that are best for a school on the spot. And also, like I said, they're leading other adults in their capacity. So it's a building custodian 1 all the way through a building custodian 3 and all the positions in between. Building custodian 3 would be our head high school positions, where you might have a staff of 16 plus custodians that you've got to figure out how to maintain and clean a pretty complicated site on a daily basis. So that was where we ended up. Essentially, those leadership positions that are absolutely critical. All those spots would be essentially the person who is in the building, first point of contact with every teacher, first point of contact with our permit holders, and working hip to hip with the principal on making sure that the building's the way it needs to be. On pay range, I saw Deirdre typed this up, and I think this is something to just consider and take a step back and think through. Right now, pay range 12 through 16 in this unit goes from $45,000 to $65,000. These are people and quality people, but people making the same as a 10-year teacher in our district. And I can tell you that our principals and our community take these positions incredibly seriously. And I don't find a principal ever that wants to settle for a head custodian any more than they would want to settle for an average teacher. These are really critical spots that take a pretty complex skill set to make sure you do the job correctly.
Thank you. DJ?
Another clarification. Can you explain the differences on the core competencies and what the union is proposing as opposed to current practices in how those would be incorporated in promotions and or transfers?
Yes. I'll give it a whirl, and then I'm gonna look to my team.
I've read the union materials, but I haven't seen anything from the district in relation to this.
Right. So the general difference, I think, is when we're thinking about core competencies and development of core competencies and how those might align to training and development, we actually wanted to and had this discussion with our union partners about that being also a shared and collaborative process, right? We did that with our principal selection, screening and selection, and our teacher screening and selection, and we would see that just continuing. I think where the disconnect was, and we obviously haven't had the opportunity to come together and develop what those competencies would be, but this idea that You could create a training around a core competency. You could go through that training, and you could essentially get a stamp of approval for that training, and that training says that you're ready to transition or move into that next position. And we're saying that the professional development and training related to those competencies are really important, and we value that and we want that as well. But we also feel like it's very important, on top of that, for you to go through the interview process as we do in many of our other positions and demonstrate your competence to move into that next level position.
And again, I hate to be asking you about the union's proposal, because I know that it puts you in an awkward position, but is the proposal that without those competencies, therefore you would not be qualified and that you could not be hired for the position, or are there alternate means to demonstrate those competencies as other than the professional development?
So it is my understanding.
And again, I'm trying to, I skimmed some of this stuff,
right,
and it was a few days ago, so I'm trying to.
That set of training, so there's just levels or the sets of trainings that would be connected to competencies that would essentially ready you for that next position. Do you have I don't know, Heidi, if you have a different way of articulating that, or if that sounds about right, but.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dean?
Well, I believe that in the proposal that the union presented was exactly what you're talking about, where these competencies had to be accomplished, they'd have to pass it, and only then would they become a strong candidate to apply. And they could demonstrate something very clearly, similar to the trainings that you guys told me you did this year, which is great, and everyone said that was good.
Mm-hmm.
However, this mandates it to continue, which is a great idea. And I want to see that continues. And then people can clearly demonstrate that, the things that you're looking for in the next position up, I've got all the training, it says right there, and then you can then go through the hiring process. It doesn't mean you're going to get the job. And I believe you only have to interview 6. And if you still can't find someone you're satisfied with, it already says that you can shop it around. So I think this makes a whole lot of sense. It's all laid out. Plus, with the addition of, particularly at entry-level positions, in 405 under number 1, to develop a plan to work with Big Step, which is a county-funded program designed to work with a diverse community, to include their involvement in trades. That's right there. You go right to that group and that would completely offer a whole pool of diverse candidates that we could bring in to really good jobs. The jobs at the top, there's 49 of them. 7 of them are diverse, and most of them are in the 12 to 13 range. There's only 49 out of 205. 7 and 49, that's about 15% diverse in that group. And once you get to that level, your jobs are going to be there for a while. So turnover there isn't so high because they're demanding and good jobs. Below though, we do get turnover, and you can increase the diversity much quicker. So I just see this with the inclusion of the setting up a real in the contract connection with working with the county-funded Big Step program, and the competency checkoff list at the end to be really a thorough job. And I think this is quantitatively better than what we offer. So I would prefer this. Just gets this program, those 2 things getting added into the contract.
And our position is if we have an opportunity to look at external candidates simultaneously, that is what our hope is. That's what we're asking. That's the recommendation
From
that we're
12 up.
putting. Correct.
From 12 up only, and.
Correct.
Yeah. No, I could see where you would like that, and I think there's room to talk about that, but I want to talk about the other two things. I really think that this training schedule that we're really, they say, here's what you need to be in this position, and they're lined right up with all of these, from 2 through 12, here's what you got to do to be able to go on to the next one. And they're all marked off, and you've demonstrated, you did the training, you got checked off, then you're eligible to go up. If you don't have those things, that would make difficult for you to suggest that you're qualified to go up to the next one. This is what they're saying, and I support
Right.
that.
And I think that where our disconnect has been is that from our perspective, the professional development and the training is not really the issue. It is really looking at the demonstration of the competence through the interview process, right? So it's not an automatic that says because you've been here for a certain number of years or because you had this training that you automatically transition into that next position.
Yeah, I don't think they're saying that either. And there's going to be, you got to go in there and explain yourself. You're going to have an interview. I think that that's fair.
Mhm.
I don't think that should be withheld, and I think people understand that. But you'll be going in there with all the other stuff checked
Right.
off.
Yes.
You're a legit candidate.
Yes,
And
and
the likelihood of us not being able to find someone in already our good staff of hundreds more, 156 of them to try to go up. We got a great pool already trained, working for us, and want to move up.
Mhm.
Many of them do. And then in the cases where you don't find one, you have the out. You already got the out to be able to, okay, look, none of them aren't there yet.
Mhm.
And yeah, you have to justify that, and that's well that you should. And then you can move on. It's all in there, and I like the three things of working with the Big Step program, adding the competency checkoff list, and then being able to continue to bring in an outside if someone doesn't match up. But after you go through these guys, it works for me.
Michael?
So my question is, so if we were to open it to an exterior candidate simultaneously, how do we identify somebody that just interviews well, and how do we prove that that individual can actually do the skills that somebody from the inside that has gone through step 1 through 11 and now is applying for the position 12 and has year after year demonstrated the actual skills, something as simple as turning a boil, or not, I shouldn't say simple, because I do not know what our school boilers are, I'm assuming it's, so how can we spot that talent and not fail in giving the cold shoulder to somebody that has constantly shown that talent but just had a bad interview? I mean, I get nervous doing this over and over,
so the reality is internal candidates, whether we like to believe it or not, there's already some subjectivity that comes into that interview because we know that candidate, right? The purpose of us making the redesign specifically to our principal and teacher processes was to move them to where they are performance and demonstration based, which was the other part of the conversation that we had in sharing that that's the direction that we're going. And right now, our teams and our team working with Chad, there are behavior-based questions, there are performance-based questions, there are demonstration-based questions that you can ask to kind of mitigate this idea that somebody can just come in and tell me whatever they want and make it sound good, in addition to creating an interview process that is much more performance or demonstration based. So show me, give them an example. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we had a
The boiler
principal that,
thing,
yeah,
you know?
we had a principal that dug in this year and was really interested in the exact same question. And we literally walked, I wasn't there for the interview, but another administrator out at Flam Road, they literally walked to the boiler and said, spend 15 minutes walking us through this boiler. Tell us what you do on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis to make sure it's maintained and operating correctly. They even gave some scenario-based questions. If you have two colleagues that aren't getting along in the following way, how would you potentially mediate it and make it better? So there anywhere from you get this email from a teacher. How would you reply? Please type in the reply and send it to us, that you could actually see on the job how this might go. We're already kind of down that road as it is. I think as we continue to measure for competencies, it'd be more and more important to partner with HR and Deidre to make sure we had it right. It would also be important to me that we involved Local 60 to help identify what we want out of our top quality candidates and how you'd measure it.
Mm-hmm.
So then on the other hand, how are we developing our internal candidates to gain those skills? For example, I have a mechanic that does an uncanny job with the vehicles. I mean, he can bring any vehicle to life, but you put him in front of a computer, he can type a number of sentences.
Yeah, and Michael, I think that's part of that's part of what it turns out to be the kind of a cornerstone piece of where I think we differ here in terms of where Local 60 is at and where the administration's at. When we hire a custodial worker one, a trainee custodian, we're measuring for competencies like dependability and hard worker and shows up to work on time, can finish a task, can follow directions, can interact with colleagues. By the time you get to a head custodian at a high school of 2,000 students and 250 staff members, and leading 17, 18, 20 custodians to make sure that the lights are on and the place is clean every day, you're measuring for a whole different set of competencies. And it's certainly our goal that we give all of our employees opportunities to pick up these skills along the way. But in the end, there is no guarantee that the 5 people applying internally for this position would be as qualified or more qualified than someone from the outside. So we're certainly going to work with all of our custodians to make sure that we're better on the computer. But at the end of the day, there isn't a guarantee that when we get to a leadership position that the people who apply for those jobs have those skills. That's really all there is to it.
One last question: what's the best way? I mean, we're human. I can see that within myself. If somebody came in and took a spot that I was striving for, the first reaction might be, well, like, is this person really a good candidate, or they just look good on paper and they did good? So there's a little bit of apprehension. So then being on that other role, how do you break down those barriers and build that confidence? I guess that's part of the job, but how can we identify that person's going to be able to break those barriers down and really build up the team and trust from the team, especially if people felt that they were not given that opportunity themselves, and this other person from the outside did.
I think there's maybe a couple of different directions I could take this. I'd say number one, there is no better interview when it comes to actually having an opportunity to advance in your own system and in our district than the work that our custodians are doing every day in their schools. And coming and proving yourself that you have these skills and that you're ready for advancement whether it's in your school or another school, I can tell you that our principals talk to each other, and that if there is an amazing custodian who is ready for a leadership position, they've got each other's backs, and those are the people that walk through our system with ease, many times jumping their colleagues when it comes to where they're at with seniority. That there's been lots of times over the last couple of years here that principals have recommended less senior candidates because they felt they were more qualified. So I don't know if that helps that helps answer that at all. If you could kind of restate your question, did that get to that at all?
Can we just go back to the training piece, because I think that's just something that is important to state, and that's just the training that Chad and his team worked on just this summer for the staff, and the positive response that they were able to get from that, breakout sessions, and the commitment that we've already had, and we've said and we've talked about that we would be continuing to do this training and development, and that there certainly are options to think about. To your point, Michael, I think how do we support folks getting that kind of on-the-job training? So it's really thinking about how do we offer those opportunities potentially on a quarterly basis. How do we do it through Train the Trainer? Are there opportunities and ways for that level of development to ready people and provide that skill development to ready them for those next positions? And so those are all things that are on the table that are going to build on the training that was provided this summer.
Okay, Mary?
The goal I would have is that we have the opportunities for our people to advance all the way up. And even at that, at those levels that we're looking at, those are still jobs, while good paying. They're not top of the range salaries. So we want our people to have those opportunities. And I guess I'm not understanding how, if you do have the opportunity to go outside after interviewing 5 people, is it 5, 6? That you have that opportunity, why do you need to be able to do it simultaneously? I understand perfectly well that there are very, very different skills for managing than it is for doing. I've been in business a long, long time, and you can take the greatest people who might be a great salespeople, but make them a sales manager. Managing people doesn't mean they can do it. In fact, a lot of them are really bad. What makes them a great salesperson isn't the same skills that make it managing people. So I can see that there's different training or experiences or skills that go with that. I am no way saying that people should be entitled to move up and to be put in positions that they are not going to be able to be successful and support our schools and support our students with. But I think that from the way I understand it, we have the opportunity to be able to interview, and if people do not pass those qualifications, demonstrate the skills that are necessary, there is the opportunity then to hire from the outside. Am I understanding that correctly?
The language of the contract right now, and Heidi can correct me if I'm wrong, would be that we have to prove that a candidate didn't meet minimum qualifications. So we could have, and this has happened a few times in just my year on the job, that we might only have 2 people put in for a position in a school, both of which would meet minimum qualifications, but weren't necessarily really top-notch candidates. And those would be times that I think it would be fair for the principal to take a chance, or at least have a look to see if there's someone from the outside that could be more qualified to serve their students and community.
Is it a way to address that, to be able to change what the minimum qualifications are And the other thing is whether there could be an opportunity that, in fact, there is a year or two probation in that term. So yes, you are giving people the opportunity perhaps to step into positions that you may not think, but you're giving them that opportunity. And if it doesn't work, they'd still be able to stay within the district and backfill into another position.
So we already have the ability through a probationary period to send folks back to their previous position. I'm not aware of at any time that happening, even when I was at La Follette, and certainly we haven't taken advantage of that in my tenure over the last year. And I think part of the reason is many times when a candidate advances through the system, then there is a domino effect that happens, that by the time we get to 6 months in a probationary period, you might have 4 or 5 different positions that have that principals have given up half a day to interview for, and we have all of a sudden great fits in 5 other buildings and one that wasn't a great fit at your probationary spot. So I agree with you that that is an option, but I guess the reality of how that plays out isn't always the best, the way the contract at least.
I guess I would hope that we could find a way that that yes, sets qualifications that even at the minimum level that we would be satisfied with, and that there's still an opportunity to give people the opportunity.
Yeah, I just had 3 quick points. First, I can't foresee supporting any position that doesn't allow us to hire the best person for the job. And I just don't see that, particularly for jobs that are very important like this. Second, I don't think we can make a policy based on the assumption that our interviewing practice doesn't work, that we can't, through an interview process, figure out who would be the best person for the job. I just reject that premise. And third, I'm really uncomfortable with a system that says the only way anyone in the world can get hired as a custodian in Madison is to start at the very bottom, working part-time on a night shift in some school. I mean, we're just tying our hands in a way that I think is totally unnecessary. I see getting training, giving the best possible training. I see working with Big Step is a great idea, but I just think we need to be able to provide an avenue for high-quality people that would be a wonderful asset to our school to have an opportunity to get hired. And under the AFSCME proposal, I just don't see that happening. As a practical matter, we will have a closed job.
I think, Mary, one of the other issues, or one of the other reasons why we were even suggesting those higher range positions is around diversity and diversifying the workforce. No, we have no challenges in our lower level positions having diversity. But when we start to transition and look at those leadership positions, and if the same model of working your way through, it could be 10 years or more before somebody would be able to move through that, and for us to have any leadership that would be diverse in those ranges. I mean, there is some, but that's really at those levels, it really diminishes quite significantly.
I have questions about how we're managing people actually at the lower levels. If we can't find qualified candidates to promote into these head positions, there's something with the pool and how people are being managed and how they're being trained, and the performance evaluations are an important part of that, along with training. I mean,
Yes.
I don't agree that it's an entitlement and it's a closed shop. I believe in competition for positions and advancement. I have no problems with that, but I also believe that if we're managing people really well and we're getting the most out of people's potential and providing them with the type of environment where they can grow and thrive and develop, Ed, I'd say that's actually the best possible way, because if people don't feel that they have positions and opportunity for growth, they're less motivated to even stay within and to do the best jobs possible. I'd want to see a healthy, competitive system.
And we agree
Yeah,
with you, Mary.
totally agree with that.
And Chad and
Yeah.
I have transitioned into these roles, and through these conversations have had those very conversations, which is part of the reason during the summer handbook development process and through this last year where we talk specifically about professional development. And we continue to reiterate that we are committed to that. We acknowledge that it wasn't where it needed to be. And we stepped into an environment, essentially pulled the covers back, and it was what it was. So we're in a position where we can do something about that, and we can change it, and we're committed to doing that.
Jen, you would-
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate this idea that we think it's both and, Mary. Everything that has been talked about, having a competency-based system, stronger professional development for our staff, opportunities for promotion, evaluation that's meaningful. We talked about this a year ago. I quite honestly feel like we're completely rehashing the discussion we had at this table a year ago. And I think that we've worked with AFSCME to try to work through all of those different issues. I think Chad, with his leadership and his team, have made some progress in those areas. Are we finished? No. I think all we're saying is that we want the freedom and flexibility to both do a better job promoting from within and to be able to simultaneously, in some of these key positions, be able to look at externals at the same time. I think last year we talked about some examples of experienced custodial managers from neighboring districts wanting to come in here who could not break into our system because they had to start right from the kind of entry-level position and start over and work their way up. And that just doesn't seem right to me. And fundamentally, we're missing out on opportunities to not only promote our own people, but to pick, the best people who are out there, right? And sometimes those are our own people. We talk about those things as if they're in conflict with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I just fundamentally don't believe that they need to be.
TJ?
As I see it, there's kind of two issues here that we're mixing up in some ways. One of which is the question of when external candidates have equal access, and what that process looks. I guess there's kind of a 1B would be what that process looks like. I generally agree with Mary. I think that if you have somebody who's in a 6-month probationary period and they're not doing a good job and they are okayed, that's a failure of management. I mean, that's you don't blame the person in that position for it, and so I think that that's a mistake to make, to put people's opportunities, to limit our loyal employees' opportunities based on failures of management is a huge mistake. So, in relation to that, though, I do think that we have this competency-based. AFSCME has put forth this competency and seniority-based proposal, and I think that number one, I guess I have a question: is that if we were to adopt this, would we be in a position to implement it? I mean, it's a very complex proposal. It requires training, certified training in many areas.
Right.
So.
Not immediately, no.
I mean, yeah,
So it would have to be some kind of phase-in.
Well, I mean, if you even take a look at a few of the things that would be a recommendation would be, let's say, computer training and Google certification. We have teachers spending a full week at the Power Up Institute on their own time this summer at Edgewood to get Google certified. I hear what you're saying, TJ, like to figure out how am I going to Google certify 200 people that are, and you heard it here, gravely needed to serve our schools on a daily basis, figuring out ways to pull them out of our schools to give them a week-long training to get a Google stamp. That's just one of a dozen things listed there. How does that play out?
So I guess what I'm saying is that if like Dean, I think that this competency-based idea as part of how people move the ladder, and not necessarily the full, combined with seniority and combined with, you can always reject candidates if they don't interview. But as part of it, I really like it, and I think that it gives both opportunities to our employee and creates levels of confidence in what they've achieved and what their abilities are that our administrators can use. But we can't go to it tomorrow. And so, because we're not ready. And so I guess that we're supposed to approve this contract the 29th? The handbook? What's the date? I'm just...
Yeah,
28th.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that we have kind of, right here, we have this one thing here, which is the language that's being offered by the administration, which I'm not comfortable with, and we have this other thing that we're not ready to do. And so I guess that I'd like to see something before the 28th, which allows us to transition towards a version of this. And again, not line for line. I think that this isn't, the holy writ, but I think that the core ideas and the core concepts are something that provides security at both ends. And so I don't know how we get there by the 28th, though. I'm a little stymied by that.
So the way the handbook process works is that when the committee that is working together cannot come to an agreement, I make a recommendation to the board. And the process isn't that ASME makes a recommendation, I make a recommendation, and you choose which one you prefer. And so I think with that said, if the board isn't in agreement with the recommendation, I'll either forward it, you vote it up or down. If it's voted down, it goes back to the status quo. What's currently in the handbook remains in the handbook. It's just, that's how the process works. We go back to the handbook process. We do this on an annual basis, and we continue to try again. Heidi, you can probably add to that, but this is the first time we're going through this process, so I want to make sure that we actually use the process as we've laid it out and as approved by the board. Heidi?
You're correct. The way that you summarize it, you're the one that makes a recommendation, and it's up to the board whether or not to accept that recommendation.
That's right. So I can either choose, based on this discussion, not to forward the recommendation. I can choose to forward it, let you guys vote on it, and it plays out the way it plays out. I'll have to make that decision based on what I hear tonight. If I choose to forward it, we'll find out what you have to say on that Monday. And if the answer is not to support my recommendation, status quo, and it goes into another annual cycle of discussion through the handbook process. Okay?
One question.
James.
One question I have is levels of 1 through 11. What do our diversity numbers look like at those levels from 1 to 11?
So it's about 30% diversity. So
And
45 of the 156 positions that are laid out in that category are staff of color.
Okay, and we always have this broad category of staff of color. At some point, I'd like to see what that breakdown is in terms of staff of color.
I have it right here. I'll send you a copy.
Give me some numbers. Leave here today.
I mean, that one is it's not a clean copy. It's got chicken scratchings on it, but.
And also, what's 12 to 16 and diversity as well?
749.
749, okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, moving right along.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
November referendum discussion.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so Mike Berry is approaching.
Okay.
All right, so we have a substantial agenda item still on the docket for tonight. So I appreciate everybody hanging in here. This is an important discussion about a potential referendum on the November ballot. I want to just say a few words before passing it off to Mike, given the time of night. We are proposing this potential referendum to the board for consideration tonight, in large part because of the great progress that we've made as a district over the last few years. We have a really strong plan. We've really gained momentum. We're getting improved outcomes in our area of focus, and we want to build on that momentum in the years to come. We are worried about the lack of state funding undermining that progress, and we're going to demonstrate that need tonight. We think that our proposal offers an opportunity for our community to demonstrate its commitment to our students and families when the state hasn't. And then lastly, our goal for tonight is to do a few things. We want to first and foremost demonstrate the need. Secondly, we want to demonstrate the responsible approach that we've made to budget in the past years, which includes some history of under-levying. And we want to prove the affordability of the proposal that we put together. So with that said, I'll pass it off to Mike, who's going to lead us through.
Okay, thank you, and hello, and I appreciate you hanging in there. I know you've been through a lot already this evening. So, but this is a big topic, and I'm going to move briskly, but we want to give it its due, of course. So tonight, a budget forecast and a revenue limit recommendation. Our forecasting is pointing to budget challenges in the next biennium that are going to be difficult and are going to be disruptive. And we need to be prepared for what that portends for us. And so part of our analysis ends up with bringing forward our revenue limit recommendation for your consideration. And here we go. This discussion schedule lays out where we've been from July 18th. The key thing here is that this is a discussion item for tonight. Action cannot occur, of course, at Operations Work Group. Action could occur on the 15th, but no later than the 29th. Okay? So our presentation is premised on these 4 basic points. I don't like to read PowerPoint slides, but I gotta hit this one hard. Next biennial state budget, we believe, will continue a 6-year pattern of underfunding K-12. There's no reason to think that's going to change, in our opinion. The next 2 years are going to require deeper and more disruptive cuts than we are used to. We're recommending a more balanced approach. A little bit more revenue, along with efficiencies and economies, is a recipe we think works. And so based on that, we're going to recommend an operational levy for November. Again, to keep the momentum of this organization going, as Jen said, keep our focus on teaching and learning as well. So everything that follows really proceeds from that premise. So here's a recap of the state funding history for K-12, at least going back to 2011-12, the year of the budget repair bill that reduced revenues per pupil across Wisconsin school districts by negative $557. You can see the funding since then, $100 per pupil, $150, nothing in 15-16, which is important in this discussion because it, in a way, forced us to use up or call up all of our financial reserves. We had $3.7 million of under-levied or unused levy authority going into that year, and with no state revenues, we had to act. 16-17 current year, $100. And down at the bottom here in the blue shade, this is our forecast for 17-18 and again for 18-19. We're not trying to model here a worst case scenario or a best case scenario. We're trying to kind of go for line of best fit, what we think is most likely going to happen. That's what we came up with. This is the same information presented graphically and obviously with a longer history. This is the annual change in revenues per pupil allowed under the state formula, both revenue limit and this per pupil categorical aid. You can see the big red negative bar, again, is 2011. And you can see the progress or the funding pattern that has emerged since 2011. Essentially, the state's budget policy or sort of program orientation towards funding K-12 is pretty well known at this point. Minimum revenue growth, use the tools of Act 10 to contain your costs. And when 80% of your budget or more is personnel, you know where that's heading, right? So with that history and trend line on state funding, this 2-year forecast shouldn't be that surprising. We're assuming or projecting here less than 1% revenue growth. We can balance these budgets, but significant action is going to be necessary, more than we're used to. What we consider normative around here will not be sustainable, mostly because we lack revenue boosting reserves that we've had in the past, either fund balance reserve, unused levy authority, federal funding, enrollment that was boosted by 4K. We don't have any of those little extras that have helped us or sustain us recently. So that's our forecast. Very small revenue growth and a lot of budget cost containment to survive in this environment. We haven't figured out exactly what the budget actions would be. We haven't discussed it with the board, SLT, but we have a pretty good sense of it just in terms of scale. Here are the specifics on the revenue side. We say less than 1% revenue growth, specifically 0.54 this year, 0.86 next year, 0.65 the year after. Again, this is a forecast, but we think it's a very reasonable forecast, and we need to be prepared for what that means. So here's how the expenditure side looks. This is a mirror image of the revenue side. First, general fund expenditures. This shows the current year and a 2-year projection. We don't have to worry about this year, 16-17. That budget's been balanced. We're really focused on 17-18 and 18-19. And you can see in here, there's a line right in the middle. We shaded it in sort of a beige color that says budget reductions to be determined 17-18 and 18-19. These are the actions we'll have to take or reverse off of what has been sort of our normative budget practices. About 12 million in 17-18 and about 10 million in 18-19. And here's what those might look like. So you know in 16-17, you know what our formula was. Held the line on health insurance, introduced an employee premium contribution to do that, reduced the staffing plan by 64 FTE, modified our strategic priorities. Some of those same features are going to be present going forward and then some. So in 17-18, here's how we're thinking of approaching it. Hold health insurance at 0 again. We accept that challenge. We believe that there are efficiencies that can be made within that 3 HMO model, and we want to leave that as a kind of a cornerstone of our budget philosophy. But we're also looking at 70 plus position reductions. And this is important. We had position reductions in the 16-17 budget, but it's premised on an enrollment decrease. At least most of it was premised on an enrollment decrease. Here we're not. Here this is just position reductions with a flat or very slightly increasing enrollment piece. So it's a different challenge. Under this model, no funding for priority actions whatsoever. And as for the compensation plan, we'll be able to do some fraction of what we have done in the past. But steps, lanes, base wage, or its equivalent in a new model, not even close. And so that's what it's going to take. And the following year is simply a repeat of that formula. With one added point, this gets harder every year. Right? Just the cumulative nature of cutting, especially when it gets to staff positions, you do start to reach a point where there's diminishing marginal utility. So, so that's your 2-year view. And when we talk about need and demonstrating the need, we're not trying to be alarmist. We're just trying to say this is what we see very realistically for the 2 years coming up if the state budget is the way that it has been. Of course, that model produces very favorable levy increases for the next few years, and that, of course, is a positive. But that positive is part of a larger package of budget actions that are not positive net for this organization. So here's an alternative. We created this version 2 with additional revenue. And I'll pause if there are questions, otherwise I'm just going to keep rolling. This is sort of part 2 of the presentation, additional revenue model. So, we want this hopefully to demonstrate the value and also the economy in our proposal. We're really hoping to position the district in such a way that, that the budget and the budget process is not completely at cross purposes with the core mission of the district. It's hard to talk coherent instruction, thriving workforce. At the same time, during budget, we're talking 120 layoffs, position reductions, and defunding key aspects of the work. So that's the inconsistency that we're really concerned about. Yes, TJ.
You said you're pausing here for questions. I was going to save at
Yeah.
the end, but this slide actually hits one of the things that a question about. Last year, equalized value went up 3.47 this year. We're using a 3.52 number. And from what I can see of your projections going forward on the mill rate, you're using a 3.52 till eternity. If you go back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we have flat or declining. And when we do the mill rate projections based on a 3.52, I'm not real comfortable with that. I think that's I would like to see alternate projections at 3.0.
On tax-based growth?
Yeah, on tax-based growth. I mean, and maybe even on 2.75 or something like that. I mean, I think that we're going to see property wealth in our district grow again and steadily in the future. But I'm not sure that 3.52. We haven't seen growth like that since before 2008 till these last 2 years, and so I'm not real comfortable with that. And so I just that was on this slide, and the strong growth. I agree. I agree. Our best projections are growth, but maybe do even one at 4 too, just to see, because it might be 4. I don't know.
It's so central to our strategy. Our strategy is that Madison is growing rapidly. Its tax base is growing rapidly. That this is a uniquely dynamic zone of economic activity, and I'm just going to jump ahead to the appendix and show you some numbers that support that. This is City of Madison, not our whole school district, but just the city. And this is new construction only. New construction only. No inflationary numbers here. Down at the bottom, those are expressed in millions. So TJ, to your point, you can see back in 2007, over $500 million of tax base growth just in the city and just from new construction. And of course, the Great Recession had its impact. But look at what happened in 2014, back over 500 million. That translates to more than 2% tax base growth for us, just on new construction. And then look at 15, and the projections for 16, 17 are just as robust. Of course, nobody has an absolute crystal ball that can fill that number in for me from the city, because believe me, I tried to get them to do it. But they will all say that the trends remain very similar too. So, in a way, the school district could end up being really out of sync with the vitality of this community, which is thriving and growing. And through revenue limits, the school district will be contracting. And that's because it's a one-size-fits-all statewide revenue limit formula. And that would be really odd. And there is a fix for that, which is the local decision to override the state revenue formula. And that's what we're advocating, because we don't think it lines up well at all. So, so.
I mean, I'm just, and I appreciate the critique of the state formula. I just, again, that the current equalized value, we were, the last time we were this high was, I believe, 2008. And it's been either downhill or steady since then, and then the last 2 years it's been a climb back.
It is.
And so whether that was pent up desire, whether all sorts of things, I would like to see some alternate numbers with lower projections,
Okay.
and perhaps higher ones too. I mean,
Sure.
you're the booster. Go higher also, but let's just see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I think we're all in agreement with you.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Sure.
It doesn't hurt to see some alternative
Yep.
scenarios. So
Absolutely.
I mean, it's late.
Absolutely.
So I agree with. I think we agree with you.
Okay. So, yeah. So, so speaking of, tax. Let me back up. This is where we left off. This is a revised revenue forecast for 17-19, and so what you see here is an injection of additional revenue into the. I'm sorry, I got to back up even further.
Yeah, you got to go back to.
There we go.
Budget forecast.
We were on this slide.
Yeah, that's the
So this is our revised proposal with additional revenue, and our goals here were to keep the levy impact under 4% and rely on strong tax base growth to help diffuse that impact. So here's the revenue proposal. This is built on the model from 2008. It is a phased-in revenue limit approach. It started out as 10 million, 8 million, 8 million. And then really for smoothing effect, we went 5, 5, 8 million, 8 million, and introduced it into 16, 17, as opposed to waiting to 17, 18. So again, just for the smoothing impact. So that's the key to the revenue proposal. That's what we're recommending. And
Can you explain that? I don't understand the smoothing impact point.
well, we must have run 15 of these. And the one that we were near settling on started in 17-18 with a $10 million lift in the Revenue Authority. And then we were looking at maybe a way to smooth that would be go 5 million in 16-17, but not spend it. And then 5 million in 17-18. The 16-17 levy year is going to be so positive that we thought we could put this in and still have a really great tax scenario. Because as it stands now, we're looking at 0.4 levy increase when we know we have at least 2% real construction growth. So we're heading for a negative on tax bills. We thought, well, this might be a way.
So
Yeah.
one way to conceptualize that is to say that rather than spending down the surplus in the current budget, the 1.6 million or whatever we saved from last year, we could raise more revenue this year if the vote passed, and then maintain that amount in the surplus.
Yes, that's another way of phrasing it. But yeah.
Or the levy could be 2.0. Whatever, maybe you've got that.
That's right. And yeah, I can show you that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so let me try to show what that would look like. Maybe that will kind of wrap it up when you see the impact. So 5, 5, 8, and 8 over a 4-year phase-in. This is the revised revenue forecast. You can see the differential. More revenue. Obviously, that's what this is all about, 1.4% across the years, then larger in the third year. So remember, these numbers were all 0.5, 0.8 under the original version. So, and then here's what happens on the expenditure side. We will still be engaged in very thorough budget work, and there are economies that we will have to find in our budget. But this is a different order of magnitude. This is more manageable and budget challenge. We believe it will be less disruptive. And under this scenario, the budget development process doesn't become the center of the storm and doesn't lead to negative impacts at the school level, which is where we're heading. So 17-19, even with this referendum proposal, is still going to have its budget challenges. I mentioned health insurance. but we think it's more manageable. We think it fits better. Here's a comparison on the tax levy. This is just the levy side of it. Now, levy is only part of the equation, but the numbers on the bottom half are the levy with this proposal, and the numbers up on top are the levy without this proposal. So our logic was that that the model up on top, which is basically the state, what happens through the state revenue limit formula and their policy, does one thing primarily. It manages tax levy. The impacts on the school district are a local problem. The one on the bottom is, we think, more balanced and more reasonable, as long as we can prove that it makes sense and it's affordable. So those levies were designed to all be under 4%. And we made that happen. And we're pretty confident that that will hold. This is our tax levy history. And as you can see, we've got choices to make for 16, 17, and 18 based on which direction we end up going. We wanted to highlight in here the impact of debt on our levy. As you can see, it's shown in red. It's relatively a small part of the overall equation, but we need to talk about what might happen going forward. This is another way of looking at it. This is a pie of our total tax levy that we did last fall. And you can see in red the debt levy was about 5 million at that point, 2% of the overall levy. This is the levy that's coming up for this fall, where the debt service jumps up to 8 million. And at that point, it's about peaked out. So the impact of that April 2015 referendum is fully baked in to the tax levy this fall. It looks like this in terms of bar chart. You can see in 2000, this levy, which is 2016-17 on the left, shows that we've basically peaked. And there is the opportunity here to do long-range facility planning, ultimately have recommendations come out of that work, bring the ideas to the community, hopefully ones that would be supported, and then the capital planning, the debt planning here, would be such that we have to work around the existing debt. And I think there are possibilities. We have, for a district of our size, even with that recent referendum, such a small amount of principal and interest from referendum-approved debt. So we wanted to make sure we at least dealt with that issue. Here's example language. This is what it would look like. The numbers obviously are to be decided, or even the issue is to be decided, but this is the form of an operating referendum that you see on ballots. I want to jump ahead and take a look at the average.
Before you jump ahead, the language.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fine with the language, but I didn't understand and each year thereafter statement. So help me with that.
So, yeah, that's a good question, and one that makes sense to
Because if it's 26
pause.
million, why didn't we just end it in 1920 for a total of 26 million? So help me with that, please.
So picture a staircase, essentially, that goes up 8 million, 5 million, 5 million, 8 million, 8 million, and then stays there. Doesn't go up or it doesn't go down. So if it went away, you would have an enormous cliff in your funding, right?
So it's recurring, which means that in 2021 and each year after, it's going to be 8 million?
No, 26.
26 million. So it hits 26 and stays at 26 into perpetuity?
That's right. Now, on an incremental basis, which I think is really the key to this, it's 5 million, 5 million, 8 million, 8 million, 0 on an incremental basis. Right?
And we have.
Does that make sense?
That raises some questions for me, but we'll have to talk about
We have $13 million in recurrent authority now that we're using. Is that the right figure? 13 from the 2008. We have $13 million in recurring authority.
That's now fully built
Yeah,
into.
but
That's
it's,
right.
yeah,
That's
so,
right.
I mean, it's I couldn't remember if it was
That's
13 or
right. It
14.
was
That's why I was asking.
5, 4, and 4.
5, 4, and 4. Okay, so it would be similar to 2008, except for it would be bigger numbers.
Yeah, it answers my question.
That's right. Okay. We've been looking at trying to.
Mike.
Yeah.
I'm a little tired of having to look at things that we want to do and not have enough. And cutting is not something that I want to do anymore. And I'm just wondering, is 5, 5, 8, and 8 enough? Why not 6, 6, and 9, and 9? And I know that this is based on what we know, but what about some anticipated things that we don't know yet that probably we're going to need?
Mm-hmm.
And is this going to do it for us? Now, we know politically what we're up against at the state, what they're going to do and what they're not going to do.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about raising that levy to some level that's really hard to understand. So I'm not sold that 5,
Mm-hmm.
that 26 is enough right now.
Mm-hmm. Jen, did you
I
want
was
to-
just going to say, you're right, Dean. As Mike demonstrated in his in our proposal, we're still going to have to go through cost-cutting exercises. We're still going to have to make tough decisions, and I think it's important to continue to have that pressure to some extent. And we were balancing making it an affordable proposal. So I think this is an area where we want feedback from everyone. Like, is this more balanced approach, the right approach? And I hear
Just
you're
one
saying
other comment that
yeah.
I don't quite yet figure out where
Can add
the
to that,
TID
Mike.
money is factored in. You
Mhm.
said it wasn't in narratives, but we still got a little, somewhere around 9 million
That's right.
that I don't quite see. I haven't quite
Yeah.
worked my way through all this. It's kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Sure. So the TID 25, the promissory note, has to be accounted for in 2 ways. The first is just, where's the 9 million live, and what are you going to do with it? And in our modeling here, we've put it off to the side because it's one time, it's non-recurring, and we thought that money is there to supplement, not really supplant the operating budget. So it's essentially off in its own little budget. It does impact the general fund in that the additional spending related to that note will have a undesirable impact on equalization aid, and we did factor that in. So by our logic, when we ran this and included TID 25 note proceeds as a revenue, we think it really masked the underlying revenue problem that we foresee. It made it look much rosier than it really is. And so for that reason, we put it to the side.
So yearly, we can decide how to dip into that according to what we want to do.
That's right.
Every year.
That's right. Our plan is to bring it back each
So the 26
each October.
really is not, that's something
That's
else.
right.
Well, I guess, back to my first question is I don't know if it's enough. So, not saying it's too low, but I want to.
Right.
It was not decided yet.
Right.
Maybe we should take a better
Right.
look. Maybe 2 more million or 3.
I have to agree. We don't know that there is any exact right number here.
Mhm.
We've run like I said, maybe 15 models of this. Our guiding principles were ask for what we thought was absolutely needed, but no more. Try to keep a tax levy under 4%, and try to manage this over a multiple-year period so that it's affordable for the community and makes sense with where the community is going. Those 3 fences kind of were guiding our work and led us here. We think this is reasonable, but again, there's no perfect right answer.
Yeah, if I can comment on the enough, whether or not it's enough, it's sort of a different way, maybe looking at the budget. You know, tonight, first part of the meeting, we had some very impactful speakers speaking about the impact of on minorities in this district, and so when we look at the budget, one of the things that that's mindful to me is that we still have the issue of gaps, and gaps were created prior to revenue limits. So when we talk about raising money, we have to remember that we had money and we had gaps. So what's the relationship there, and how are we going to deal with that? So, because we had gaps, if some estimates are right, for 40 years prior to the revenue limit. So we had money and we had gaps. So to me, you obviously got to have money for operating. I'm not debating or saying anything about that, how much we have to have. But the question is, within those budgets, what kind of decisions are we going to make?
TJ?
I think Dean's question and the question that wasn't asked is this too much? Raise some questions or reinforce to me questions about the timing on this. That right now we have very, very little time to consider what we're putting on the ballot. We have very, very little time to hear from and/or talk to and/or educate the public with this. I'm going to throw some numbers out there, and then I want to come back to make a suggestion, a point. There's different ways you can look at what's enough and what's too much. I ran average. This referendum looks like it produces about a 2.6% average growth in Fund 10, about 2.6. Since 2008, we've seen 2.37 average growth in Fund 10. Just to kind of perspective, people have been following the district since 2008. Since 2013, it's been 2.14. And again, these aren't, they're numbers, and they give us a guide. So this is a greater increase percentage-wise than we've experienced since 2008 or 2013. Both those scenarios, both those years, there's a couple of years there where we just have like a $10 million growth in Fund 10. One of those was the year we did the Mondo purchase. The other one I think might have something to do with 4-year-old kindergarten. So there's a couple freak years in there, actually. But that's just a little perspective for things. And again, this provides about a 2.6% average growth for whatever that means. I am completely uncomfortable with levying, with having the first year in 2016-17 to smooth things over. We're smoothing things over by collecting an extra $5 million from the taxpayers to fund an already balanced budget. And to me, all we're doing is making the difference between two budget levies closer. We're still collecting $10 million in 2017-18. Right. So the concept of smoothing over and beginning this year is something that I'm adamantly opposed to. To me, it's a public relations trick at the expense of $5 million of tax collections. And I don't see it. More generally, I don't see why we don't do this in April and spend some time asking questions, listening to people, taking scenarios, considering things like, Dean talks about doing more. I would like to see something around compensation in this. This assumes compensation structures remain essentially the same. It doesn't, and so I think that, as our Ask Me people tonight reminded us, we haven't had a significant across-the-board compensation increase. We've had steps and lanes and that stuff, but we haven't a significant one in a long time. Pre-Walker, actually. And I also think that there are certain things around class sizes and other things like that we hear from the community where perhaps we could, put some hard limits on class sizes. 2 years ago in the budget, I proposed I asked for an analysis of hard limits on class sizes, and it was expensive. But if we're going to go to the community, I think that maybe we should say, hey, look, if you give us this money, we can put these hard limits on class sizes, and see what comes from that. In a similar manner, I think one of my regrets of the last referendum is that we didn't do more dedicated tech plan funding. And I think that, again, including items like that might be an idea, where it's like, this is dedicated tech plan funding. We can't do any of that with a decision we make in August. We can do it if we push this to April and have a process, an open, public, inclusive process. And so that's I'm not saying I would vote against this if it came up at the end of this month. But I am saying that I would much prefer to do this in April and do it differently and right.
Does that change when we collect the money?
What's that?
Does that change when we
Well,
collect
I'm also opposed to collecting money for this year. I mean, but if we do it in April, we could do 2017-18. I mean, we could. But we've balanced a budget this year.
But we didn't balance a budget this year because we are spending millions more than we're bringing in. We are dipping into our fund surplus and
1.6 million.
No, it's more than that.
The energy, well, that's part of a balanced budget. The energy exemption is part of a balanced budget.
We have, it isn't a balanced budget. And if we did what is recommended here, it would be exactly what we did 2 years ago, which was to tax to the max, even though we weren't spending it, in order to build up a surplus that we are spending down this year. So what is being proposed is precisely the same approach, is that you tax in a way that levels out what the impact is, so we don't have this reduction this year and then big jump the following year. I mean, that's completely consistent with what we've done before. And if I could talk about why it makes sense to do it in November, it's that the point of this referendum, at least from my perspective, is not to say we need to go to referendum to spend because we want to, do X and Y. We are going to referendum because the state has put us in a situation where you cannot fund your operations on a going forward basis under the revenue limits that the state has set. The revenue limits serve no legitimate state purpose other than starving school districts of money. So the focus of the referendum, to my mind, should be completely on the revenue limits and not saying we need X. If you say we need to go to referendum because we want to do X and Y, because we want additional technology spending, or because we want to fund higher compensation, then you're buying into the idea that the revenue limits set a normal level of spending, and that if you go to referendum, you got to go there to do something extra, to do something more than is the normal range of expenses that a district would experience. And that's exactly not what the revenue limits do. The revenue limits put a vice on us that keep us from spending, that keep us from going forward on a steady state basis. You've got to go there in order to get the money just to keep the operation going. So I think it's a fundamentally different approach. And if you look at where we were in budget planning for this, the current budget, or the budget we just passed, we were deep into it in March, and so we can't wait till a referendum in April in order to start our budget process planning for the 17-18 year. I think that we have the information that we need to go to referendum in November. We can make the case that it's all about revenue limits, not about explicit spending, and we can decide on, what the appropriate level is. I think this makes sense. Whatever the limit is, we don't have to spend that up to that amount. But I think that, over the past, I think that the cap that we, kind of on a functional level, what has been when we haven't been, really stifled by the revenue limits, the self-imposed limit we've kind of put on ourselves in our budgeting is that we didn't want a tax levy to go above 4%. And it's gotten pretty close a couple of years in the past. And so this is designed in a way that keeps us within the limits we've kind of effectively set for ourselves in the past. So I think it makes sense. But, you know, we've got to do it, or we're going to be, you know, making cuts that no one wants. And I think the sooner the better, and attack the revenue limits rather than
Why are
authorize
those two
specific
things
spending.
mutually exclusive? I guess.
Pardon?
Why are they mutually exclusive?
I still didn't hear.
Why are those two things mutually exclusive? I mean, it seems
Which
as though,
two?
well, it is saying that you shouldn't have targeted expenditures for your referendum. I'm asking, why are they mutually exclusive? Why can't you talk about the issues that the state is imposing on us, but at the same time, you can also say, you know, we like to do some of these other things.
We have a tax plan.
Pardon?
Well,
Well,
I think,
he didn't say
yeah.
he didn't. That's not what he didn't say we didn't have a tech plan. He was just saying.
I'm saying
to
it
consider some
shouldn't
of
be
these other
packaged
things.
in terms of
And-
authorizing us to do extra stuff. It's allowing us to do extra above the norm, above what would be the normal level of growth.
I can see it's reasoning because then I feel like we would get that fodder back from the state that, oh, look at this school, they're, you know, we put it on their lap and they're doing frivolous spending, which we are not. We're essentially just asking for a raise because now we're working at a poverty level that leaves us at a deficit in a more simplistic way of
Well, I
thinking
think
about it.
I'd like to comment on Ed's points because I think these are good points that have been raised, but the danger of waiting until April exposes us, we will have to make cuts because we will not know how that referendum turns out, and so we will have to send those notices, right, to the staff that will be those layoffs. Second of all, you don't know what the legislature will do between now and April that may undercut our ability to go to referendum. And in terms of extra funding, I don't think anyone can see that somehow this is some boondoggle that we're looking at. We are going into fund balance. We have drawn down that fund balance since the time that I've been on the board significantly because we have had to. And so I think this is the only smart plan. I think it's incredibly responsible. And I think you heard certainly some of the concerns. I do think we talked long and hard about the healthcare last budget cycle by offering more expensive plans. Those do cost the district and taxpayers $7 million a year. We had heard that we'd still be able to come back. We want to keep healthcare affordable to our staff, but we also don't want that our whole budget is consumed going forward by increases in healthcare every single year. And so I think looking and saying, yes, we still have to take this on. We have sort of kicked the can down the road a little bit, but we haven't taken on the overall long-term annual increases in healthcare that will continue to just eat things up unless we take it on. So I think, yes, we still have that work to do. Now, in terms of taxing more and asking for more, Dean, one thing I really like about this plan is that it leaves us some opening for when that long-term facilities plan comes in, and we need to look at additional investments in our schools. And that's what, as the board, I think we have to step back and be those, be fiscally responsible in the very long-term way as well. Because we know we have 50 schools that are aging, and we want to make sure that this district is attractive, that our students feel proud when they walk in the buildings. And I really feel that if we are able to maintain a responsibility to the taxpayers that is tax increases we can live with, that are about inflationary, which is about what this is, it sets us up for being able to justify more when we need more, but not to say we're going out for more because, you know, we want to do this, and we want a little extra for this and this and this. I think this is a responsible plan that will very much be supported by this community. I would certainly stand behind it, but I urge us to do it because we do not know what will happen between now and April, except that we will be sending out the notices of
Guaranteed.
layoff without doing this. And why put our staff through that stress?
Can I just make one quick comment, Ed?
Yep.
I thank you, Mary, for that comment. I think it would be a major tactical error for the board not to take advantage of the November election. I also want to remind the board that what we want to preserve is not this idea of the old kind of cost to continue notion that I know was used a lot when I first came to MMSD. What we're trying to preserve is the new way of working that we've established, which is about identifying these priority actions that are moving our district forward. That is creating stability where our educators and employees can do their best work and not have to be worried about layoff notices every year and what we sometimes call the chipping away effect. It's not healthy for our school district. So we don't want in any way to suggest that we wouldn't be reprioritizing on an annual basis, continuing to repurpose funding from within our school district. That's the way we want to do business, no matter what the budget environment. But what we're trying to protect ourselves from is something that will dramatically undermine our ability to function in that way. So I very much encourage you to consider this proposal seriously. And I think Mike's done a great job putting it together.
I wanted just to add one quick point, if I may, that whether it's health insurance or whether it's class size or the compensation plan, that is all work to be done.
Right.
By my values, that belongs in the regular, deep annual budget process, and not so much in this kind of special issue. There is work to be done. We acknowledge it, but that's, I think, where we want to take it on.
So at the next meeting, we've got one more week before we come back to this discussion yet again with an opportunity for public comment, as well as another discussion by the board. I'm hearing a couple of suggestions for what you'd like to see in that next meeting. I just wonder if there's anything else that we can provide for the board to make you more comfortable with the proposal or change the proposal based on feedback. It's time to think.
Well, I guess the only thing is if you're firm on 26, then just give it one more thought, and that's what you like, fine.
Right.
You know, that was my question.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Well, the next question then is, do people think they'd be in a position to vote on it next week? Or, I mean, we could after the public hearing.
Since
Mary
the cat
says-
was out of the bag a little bit with the news, did we get any feedback from that?
I think we've gotten a few emails positive in support. What have you gotten? And maybe 2 against? Okay.
Just to characterize, one wasn't really against, but it said that we needed more accountability and more inclusive decision-making. So, and I think that that's part of the reason why I think April is there. It was not against, it was, yeah, so.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay. Seeing that it's 9 o'clock, move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All in favor? Aye.